After a fight at our family reunion, everyone turned against me. My own wife stared at me with pure disgust. "You have two options," she said. "Apologize to my son-in-law or leave this house forever." Instead of apologizing, I bought a one-way ticket across the country. By the time they realized I was gone, their perfect, luxurious lives were already burning to the ground. My name is Neil. I am 69 years old. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who completely underestimated your true worth. The July heat in Atlanta was a heavy, wet blanket over my brother-in-law Derek and his sprawling backyard. Smoke from the massive stone grill filled the air. More than 50 people from my wife Ivonne and her side of the family crowded the patio. I sat alone in a corner chair. I held a glass of iced tea. The ice had melted an hour ago. I watched my son-in-law Hunter command the center of the yard. He held an expensive imported craft beer. He raised his bottle to quiet the crowd. He announced he just secured a massive angel investment for his new real estate technology startup. He declared himself the financial savior of this family and their future. The entire yard erupted in cheers and applause. Derek walked over and slapped Hunter hard on the back. Derek praised him loudly for wearing tailored suits instead of dirty blue-collar work boots. Derek pointed his beer directly at me. He mocked my 40 years of running a commercial plumbing and trucking logistics business. He laughed to the crowd about how I spent my absolute best years crawling through flooded basements and cleaning out actual sewers. He called me a relic of the past who barely understood how modern money worked. Hunter smirked. He stepped forward to join the public mockery. He looked down at my worn leather boots. He told the crowd that society always needs people to clean out the gutters. He raised his voice so everyone could hear his next joke. He offered to hire me for his new corporate headquarters. He said he had a severely backed-up toilet on the executive floor. He publicly offered to pay me double my old hourly plumbing rate. He called it a special form of senior charity for the family. The entire family erupted into booming laughter. The sound echoed off the brick walls of the mansion. I looked across the patio. Ivonne stood with her elite country club friends. She wore a pristine white summer dress. She held a crystal wine glass. She sipped her Chardonnay. She looked right at me while the crowd laughed at my expense. We had been married for 40 years. She did absolutely nothing to defend me. She did not ask them to stop. She simply smiled and took another sip of her wine. She was deeply embarrassed by my blue-collar roots. She preferred the illusion of Hunter and his corporate success. My calloused hands had paid for her luxury car and her jewelry and the very clothes on her back. Yet she allowed a 32-year-old arrogant boy to humiliate me in front of her entire bloodline. The laughter continued. The disrespect was a physical weight in the humid air. I looked at the melting water rings on the outside of my glass. I set the glass down on the wooden side table. The sharp clack of the glass hitting the wood cut through the noise. I stood up. I did not raise my hands. I did not yell. I walked straight across the stone patio directly toward Hunter. The crowd parted slightly as I approached. Hunter stopped laughing. He lowered his craft beer. I stopped inches from his face. I spoke with absolute chilling clarity. I told him to enjoy his imaginary wealth and his fake corporate startup. I told him he could play the billionaire savior all he wanted. Then I pointed directly at my daughter Kendra. I told Hunter to never disrespect the calloused hands that paid for the imported silk dress his wife was currently wearing. I reminded him that my dirty work boots funded the very life he married into. The yard went completely dead silent. You could hear the charcoal popping in the grill. Hunter turned a deep shade of crimson. His arrogant smirk collapsed into sheer embarrassment. He stepped back, unable to formulate a single word. Derek stepped forward, aggressively clenching his fists. Before Derek could turn this into a physical altercation, a hand clamped down hard on my upper arm. The grip was bruising and desperate. It was Ivonne. Her face was twisted in pure, absolute rage. She did not look at Hunter or Derek. She glared only at me. She yanked my arm with all her strength. She dragged me away from the stunned crowd and pulled me behind the large brick garage out of sight. Her breathing was heavy. She turned her fury entirely on me. She treated me not as a husband, but as a rogue employee ruining her perfect social event. I stared back at her without a single ounce of regret or fear. Ivonne accused me of embarrassing the entire family in front of our highly successful white son-in-law. She screamed that Hunter was the future of this family while I was just a washed-up old mechanic. I asked her if she truly expected me to endure public humiliation without defending my own pride. Ivonne did not care about my pride. She gave me a final, non-negotiable ultimatum. She demanded I walk straight back to that patio right now. She demanded I apologize to Hunter immediately for ruining his celebration. She pointed a trembling finger toward the driveway. She stated clearly that if I walked out of that gate without apologizing, I must never return to her house again. I did not argue. I did not try to reason with a woman who valued a fake country club image over her husband of 4 decades. I turned my back on her. I walked straight down the driveway and out the iron gate. Ivonne screamed my name loudly. I ignored her. I pulled out my phone. I opened my airline application. I booked a one-way first-class ticket to Reno, Nevada, departing in exactly 2 hours. I flagged down a passing city taxi and climbed into the back seat. The driver started the meter and merged into the heavy Atlanta traffic heading toward the airport. I opened my joint banking application on my phone to pay the upcoming cab fare. The loading wheel spun for a brief second. The screen refreshed. I stared at the financial dashboard in absolute silence. The primary joint savings account showed a complete 0 balance. All my emergency funds were completely wiped out. The money I trusted my wife to manage was entirely gone. The betrayal ran far deeper than a simple insult at a family barbecue. My own family had robbed me blind. They assumed I would never find out until it was far too late. They assumed wrong. I stood in the middle of the bustling airport terminal. The noise of rolling suitcases and overhead announcements faded into a dull roar. I stared down at my phone screen. The banking application displayed the joint savings account I shared with my wife. Last week, the balance sat comfortably at $80,000. Today, the bold green numbers showed exactly $14.00. I did not blink. I tapped the glass screen to open the transaction history. I scrolled past the grocery bills and the gas station charges. A massive wire transfer sat at the very top of the list. The transfer was initiated exactly 3 days ago. The recipient name glared back at me in stark black text. The money went directly into a corporate account registered to my son-in-law. His fake tech startup, LLC, received every single dime of my emergency funds. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind. Hunter did not secure a massive angel investment from a venture capital firm. He did not pitch a brilliant software idea to a board of wealthy executives. He stole his funding directly from the man he just humiliated in front of 50 people. He stood in that backyard and bragged about my money. My wife allowed him to mock my 40 years of hard labor while she knew my bank account was completely empty. They took my cash and used it to buy imported craft beer and silk dresses. A cold wave of clarity washed over my entire body. I did not feel a single ounce of panic. I felt only a deep mechanical focus. I closed the transaction tab and opened the main dashboard. I needed to see exactly how deep the infection had spread. Ivonne always believed she married a man who never quite measured up to her elitist standards. She spent our entire marriage apologizing to her country club friends for my dirty work boots and my grease-stained hands. She viewed me as a simple mechanic who managed a modest fleet of plumbing trucks. I never bothered to correct her assumptions. 5 years ago, I received a buyout offer from a massive national conglomerate. They wanted my regional commercial logistics empire. I signed the heavy legal paperwork in a quiet office and walked away with $12 million in pure liquid capital. I did not buy a yacht. I did not buy a mansion in a gated community. I hired a brilliant attorney and placed the absolute bulk of my newfound wealth into an ironclad trust based securely in Nevada. I kept only a small fraction of the money in our local joint accounts to maintain the simple lifestyle I genuinely preferred. I wanted to protect my family from the toxic corruption of sudden wealth. Ivonne never knew the true sale amount. She never knew she was sleeping next to a multimillionaire. She spent her days resenting my simple habits while I silently secured our financial future. Now her greed had finally broken the dam. She and her arrogant son-in-law decided to raid the only account they could easily access. They thought they had crippled an old man. They thought they had taken everything I owned. They had merely scratched the paint on a battleship they did not even know existed. I tapped the screen again to review our property assets. The bank application loaded a completely new page. The financial damage did not stop at the empty savings account. They had gone much further than simple theft. A bright red alert icon flashed aggressively at the top of my banking dashboard. I pressed the notification. A new credit line appeared on the screen. It was a home equity line of credit. The loan amount was a staggering $300,000. The status indicator showed the funds were already fully dispersed. The collateral listed on the digital document was the 4-bedroom house in Atlanta. I paid off that mortgage completely 15 years ago with the sweat from my own brow. I downloaded the attached document file of the loan application right there in the airport terminal. I zoomed in on the final page of the contract. A digital signature sat neatly on the authorization line. It spelled out my full legal name. I had not signed a single piece of financial paperwork regarding that property in over a decade. Ivonne and Hunter had colluded to execute a highly coordinated digital forgery. They used my personal information to leverage the very roof over my head. They turned the home I built into a massive debt anchor to fund Hunter's completely failing business. They literally stole the equity of my life's work to finance his fake corporate lifestyle. The sheer audacity of the crime was breathtaking. They assumed my age made me financially illiterate. They assumed I would never check the digital portals until the bank came to foreclose on the property. My wife had handed the keys to my kingdom to a boy who despised me. I closed the document file. The anger inside me crystallized into pure strategy. I possessed all the evidence of their felony wire fraud and identity theft. I walked toward the airline customer service desk with absolute purpose. The time for silent observation was over. I dialed the direct emergency number for the bank's fraud department. A representative answered immediately. I identified myself and provided my security pins. I instructed them to place an immediate hard lock on the Atlanta property title. I declared the $300,000 credit line a product of identity theft. I officially contested the signature and demanded a full freeze on any further equity withdrawals. The representative confirmed the strict lockdown. The overhead speaker blared the final boarding call for my flight to Reno. My phone vibrated violently against my palm. A text message from Ivonne illuminated the screen. She demanded I immediately transfer $2,000 into her checking account to pay for Hunter's grand celebration dinner at an upscale steakhouse. She commanded me to stop throwing a tantrum and pay the bill like a responsible father. I stared at her words. I walked down the jet bridge and stepped onto the plane. I took my seat in the first-class cabin. I typed my reply with steady fingers. Enjoy the meal. It is your last. I hit send and immediately switched the device to airplane mode. The plane pushed back from the gate and lifted into the dark sky. I spent the entire flight organizing my legal strategy. 4 hours later, the wheels touched down on the tarmac in Nevada. I turned my cellular data back on as the plane taxied to the gate. A frantic voicemail notification instantly popped up on my screen. I pressed the phone to my ear. It was my daughter, Kendra. She was sobbing uncontrollably into the receiver. She screamed that the bank had just frozen every single one of Hunter's business accounts without warning. I walked out of the Reno airport terminal and stepped directly into a waiting black town car. 30 minutes later, I entered a sleek high-rise building in the center of the financial district. I rode the private elevator to the top floor and walked straight into the personal office of Attorney Roth. Roth was a brilliant legal strategist who had managed my secret multi-million-dollar trust for the past 5 years. He stood up from his heavy mahogany desk the moment I walked in. I did not waste time with pleasantries or small talk. I dropped my laptop onto his desk and turned the screen toward him. I pulled up the digital banking dashboard and showed him the $80,000 unauthorized wire transfer. Then I opened the forged home equity line of credit documents. I pointed directly to the digital signature falsely bearing my name. Roth adjusted his glasses and leaned much closer to the screen. His expression shifted from professional curiosity to absolute legal severity. He reviewed the IP logs and the transaction timestamps thoroughly. He looked up at me and stated clearly that this was not a simple family dispute over shared money. He confirmed that forging a signature to leverage a $300,000 mortgage constituted severe identity theft and federal wire fraud. Hunter and Ivonne had crossed the line from greedy relatives to federal criminals. I closed the laptop with a sharp snap. I told Roth that my family assumed my age made me an easy target for financial abuse. I told him the time for playing the quiet blue-collar husband was entirely over. I ordered Roth to bypass all standard warnings and initiate a complete financial demolition. We were going to dismantle their stolen luxury lifestyle piece by piece right now. I sat down in the leather chair opposite Roth and handed him a specific list of account numbers. For the past 5 years, Ivonne maintained a pristine image among her elite country club friends using a black platinum credit card. She believed the funds came from my modest pension and a small retirement savings account. She never knew that card was directly tethered to a heavily shielded subsidiary account of my Nevada trust. Kendra and Hunter also carried supplementary cards on that exact same account. They used my hard-earned wealth to lease their luxury cars and buy imported clothes while simultaneously treating me like dirt on their expensive shoes. I instructed Roth to access the primary banking terminal and pull up the active card manifest. The screen displayed 4 active platinum cards actively billing my subsidiary trust. I looked at the scrolling list of their recent transactions. Hunter had just charged $1,000 at an upscale steakhouse to celebrate his fake tech company investment. Kendra had charged $400 at a high-end spa. Ivonne was currently running a massive tab at a designer boutique in Atlanta. I gave Roth the verbal authorization to strike. I told him to cancel all 4 cards immediately and permanently. I instructed him to flag the accounts as compromised to prevent any future reactivation attempts. Roth clicked his mouse and executed the final command. The digital guillotine dropped instantly. The status icons next to their names turned from active green to a dead solid red. Their financial lifeline was entirely severed. I sat back and watched the screen. They had built their entire arrogant identities around my hidden money. Now they had absolutely nothing to fall back on but their own empty pride and useless arrogance today. I turned my attention to the forged mortgage documents. Severing their daily spending cash was only the first tactical strike. I needed to address the $300,000 they stole from the equity of my home. I instructed Roth to immediately draft a formal fraud complaint. I ordered him to bypass the local police entirely and direct the legal filing straight to the FBI Cybercrime Division. Hunter used interstate digital networks to facilitate the forgery and transfer the stolen funds across state lines. He handed the federal government the exact jurisdiction they needed to crush him completely. Roth began typing the federal complaint with rapid precision. Suddenly, my cell phone vibrated violently against the armrest of my leather chair. The caller ID displayed Yvonne's name. I let the phone ring 4 times before I calmly pressed the answer button and activated the speakerphone. Yvonne did not say hello. She was screaming hysterically on the other end of the line. She was standing at the checkout counter of an exclusive luxury boutique in the middle of downtown Atlanta. She yelled that her platinum card had just been violently declined by the main terminal. The automated system flagged the card as stolen property. The boutique manager had followed standard security protocols and literally cut the plastic card in half with scissors right in front of Yvonne and her wealthy country club friends. The utter humiliation in her voice was heavy and palpable. She demanded to know what kind of stupid banking error I had caused today. She ordered me to call the bank immediately and fix the humiliating mess before she lost all her precious social standing. I listened to her frantic breathing echo loudly through the quiet Nevada office room. I did not raise my voice or offer a single apology. I spoke with a dead and calculated calm. I informed my wife that there was no banking error to fix today. I told her the man who paid for her luxury lifestyle had officially cut the cord forever. Yvonne went completely silent for a fraction of a second before her extreme anger flared again. She threatened to log into our local joint checking account and drain every single penny I had left. I smiled coldly at the phone. I reminded her that she already drained that exact account 3 days ago to fund her son-in-law's fake business empire. Her breath hitched. The cold reality of her situation finally pierced through her arrogant exterior. She realized I knew exactly what she had done behind my back. I told her the bank fraud department had already locked the property title. I strongly advised her to stop worrying about designer clothes and start looking for a very good criminal defense attorney immediately. I informed her that the FBI Cybercrime Division would be reviewing the forged loan documents shortly. Before she could scream another angry word, I tapped the screen and ended the call. The silence in the office was beautifully heavy. I tossed my phone onto the solid desktop. I had successfully cornered them. Suddenly, a harsh warning siren blared from Roth's computer speakers. A flashing red notification dominated his primary monitor. Roth frowned and rapidly typed a sequence of security commands. He looked up at me with genuine alarm in his eyes. He announced that someone was actively attempting to breach the firewall of my master trust account. He traced the incoming ping directly to Yvonne's home network IP address in Atlanta. Roth's fingers flew across his mechanical keyboard with practiced speed. He bypassed the standard security protocols and pulled up the raw network data on his secondary monitor. The intrusion alert was not a sophisticated cyber attack. It was a desperate brute force attempt using my old passwords and outdated security answers. Roth traced the origin ping directly to the wireless router mounted in my Atlanta home office. Hunter was sitting at my personal desk and actively trying to breach the master portal of my Nevada trust. He assumed he could simply guess his way into a $12 million vault. Roth initiated a permanent hardware ban on the IP address. The system executed the command instantly. Hunter was locked out completely. He hit a digital brick wall. He realized his final financial lifeline was entirely severed. Less than 2 minutes later, my cell phone buzzed against the leather armrest of my chair. The caller ID displayed Hunter's name. I did not decline the call. I swiped the screen to answer and immediately tapped the audio record button. I placed the phone flat on Roth's desk and activated the speaker. Hunter did not offer a basic greeting. He bypassed the usual arrogant pleasantries. He barked into the receiver with a frantic and breathless intensity. He demanded I hand over the master trust passwords immediately. He claimed the money legally belonged to his wife Kendra by absolute birthright. He stated I had no right to hoard generational wealth while his brilliant real estate technology company needed immediate capital to survive. He ordered me to stop playing games and release the funds before he lost absolutely everything today. I looked across the desk at Roth. Roth gave me a slight nod. The audio recording captured every single word of my son-in-law's extremely desperate financial demands perfectly. I flatly and completely refused his ridiculous demand. I told Hunter he would never receive a single additional penny from my accounts. His panicked tone instantly evaporated and shifted into something entirely vicious. He stopped begging and started threatening me. Hunter lowered his voice and spoke with calculated malice. He informed me that he had already prepared a comprehensive medical petition to present to the Fulton County Court. He intended to declare me entirely mentally unfit to manage my own finances. He bragged that he had a sympathetic doctor waiting on standby. This corrupt physician was fully prepared to sign official legal documents stating I suffered from advanced and severe dementia. Hunter proudly detailed his entire extortion strategy over the open speakerphone. He promised to force me into a state-run medical facility against my will. He declared he would seize total control of my entire estate through a court-appointed guardianship order. He told me that once the judge granted him absolute legal authority, he would liquidate my Nevada trust and drain every single dollar to fund his real estate company. He gave me an ultimate deadline. I had to release the digital portal passwords by midnight tonight, or he would file the fake medical paperwork tomorrow morning. I did not interrupt his unhinged monologue. I did not raise my voice to defend my own sanity. I remained absolutely silent. I let him confidently detail his entire malicious extortion plot while the red recording icon blinked steadily on my phone screen. He thought my silence meant I was utterly terrified of his threats. He assumed he had backed an old, uneducated mechanic into an inescapable legal corner. He did not realize he had just handed a federal prosecutor the exact verbal evidence needed to put him in prison forever, without any real mercy today. Hunter finally finished outlining his deranged threats and loudly hung up the phone. I picked up the mobile device and ended the digital recording, the audio file saved perfectly to my secure encrypted cloud storage. I leaned forward and emailed the compressed audio attachment directly to Attorney Roth. Roth opened the file and listened to the entire conversation through his high-end office speakers. A sharp and intensely satisfied smile spread across his face. He quickly attached the digital recording to the comprehensive cybercrime report he had already drafted. The financial forgery was originally a very severe state crime. Hunter had just voluntarily escalated the situation into clear federal extortion and interstate blackmail. Roth submitted the massive evidence packet directly to his high-level contacts at the FBI field office. The federal agents now possessed undeniable proof of identity theft and criminal coercion. I knew that cornered rats always perform incredibly desperate actions when their survival is threatened. I could not simply wait blindly in Nevada while my son-in-law plotted his next malicious move. I needed absolute real-time intelligence on his physical whereabouts. I authorized Roth to hire an elite private investigator operating out of downtown Atlanta. Roth immediately wired a substantial retainer fee to a highly recommended corporate espionage expert. He instructed the private investigator to physically monitor Hunter's movements 24 hours a day. The investigator quickly established a discreet surveillance perimeter around my house in Georgia. He tapped into public traffic cameras and deployed unmarked tracking vehicles. I wanted to know every single time Hunter left the property or made a suspicious phone call. I sat back in my chair and watched the digital clock on the wall tick forward. I had successfully armed the trap. I only needed to wait for Hunter to make his final fatal mistake today. My personal phone rang loudly again just 10 minutes later. It was my daughter, Kendra. I answered the call and immediately heard her crying hysterically through the receiver. She screamed that I was completely ruining her husband's entire life. She accused me of being a bitter and jealous old man who could not handle seeing a younger man succeed. I let her vent her misguided anger before I coldly asked her about the stolen $300,000. I demanded to know why they forged my signature to leverage my house. Kendra stubbornly defended her husband. She cried that Hunter was simply trying to save their family from complete financial ruin. In her blind panic, she accidentally revealed the horrifying truth behind the fake angel investor story. The massive funds were never intended for a legitimate technology startup. Hunter owed a massive sum of money to a highly dangerous private loan shark. He stole my equity to pay off a violent criminal debt. Kendra continued sobbing and made a second catastrophic slip of the tongue. She admitted that Hunter had originally used my prized vintage car collection as the primary collateral for the illegal loan. He pledged vehicles he did not even own to secure the dirty cash. The loan shark was demanding immediate repayment, or he would seize the classic cars by force. Before I could process the sheer magnitude of this new betrayal, my phone buzzed with an incoming encrypted message. I opened the secure application while Kendra continued crying on the line. It was an urgent text from my newly hired private investigator. He sent a high-resolution live photograph taken directly from his unmarked surveillance vehicle. A heavy and dirty industrial tow truck was actively backing into my Atlanta driveway right now to repossess my vintage vehicles. I stared at the high-resolution image glowing on my secure messaging app. The private investigator had tapped into the street-facing security cameras across from my Atlanta property. A heavy industrial tow truck idled aggressively at the edge of my manicured lawn. 4 men stood in the driveway. They did not wear standard repossession uniforms. They wore heavy leather jackets and carried visible firearms holstered at their hips. These were violent debt collectors working for a private underground syndicate. Hunter had foolishly promised them my pristine vintage car collection. He pledged classic Mustangs and restored Chevrolets that I spent 2 decades rebuilding by hand. I did not panic. I opened my encrypted contact ledger and called an elite private security firm based in downtown Atlanta. I retained this specific firm during the height of my commercial logistics career to guard high-value transit shipments. I wired a $50,000 emergency retainer directly from my Nevada trust. I transmitted the verified digital titles and federal registration documents for every single vehicle in my garage. I explicitly proved that Hunter had 0 legal ownership of the assets. I ordered the security commander to deploy a rapid response tactical team immediately. I kept my eyes locked on the live video feed streaming to my laptop monitor. Less than 12 minutes later, 3 black armored SUVs swerved onto my street. They aggressively blocked the residential intersection and boxed in the rogue tow truck. 8 highly trained security operatives stepped out of their vehicles in perfect synchronization. They wore tactical vests and carried military-grade rifles. They formed an impenetrable defensive wall directly in front of my wrought iron driveway gate. The ultimate repossession interception had officially begun. I watched the violent street thugs quickly realize that they were now completely and entirely outmatched by my armed guards. A tense standoff quickly ensued in the center of my long paved driveway. The lead security commander stepped forward and presented a thick folder of official legal documents to the aggressive debt collectors. He clearly explained that every single vintage car stored behind those heavy garage doors belonged solely to a protected corporate trust. He provided undisputed evidence that Hunter did not own a single steering wheel on my property. The loan sharks reviewed the notarized papers with rising fury. They immediately realized my son-in-law had brazenly lied to secure his massive illegal cash loan. He had pledged high-value mechanical assets that he never legally possessed. The sheer realization of his foolish deception ignited a dangerous anger among the street criminals. Suddenly, the heavy mahogany front door of my house swung completely open. Hunter sprinted out onto the front porch in a state of absolute blinding panic. He mistakenly believed my hired security personnel were actually police officers arriving to arrest him for his extensive federal wire fraud. The lead loan shark bypassed my security wall and lunged directly toward the porch. He grabbed Hunter violently by the expensive collar of his tailored designer shirt. He slammed my son-in-law brutally against the thick brick pillar of the main entryway. I watched the entire physical altercation unfold in perfect high-definition clarity on my glowing screen. The ruthless criminal pointed a heavily tattooed finger directly into Hunter's terrified face. He issued a final and uncompromising verbal warning regarding the stolen $300,000. He promised catastrophic physical consequences if the massive debt remained unpaid by Friday morning. My security commander ordered the criminals to vacate the premises immediately. The loan shark shoved Hunter roughly to the ground and signaled his men to retreat. The loud tow truck finally reversed completely away. Hunter scrambled frantically off the hard concrete and ran back inside the brick house. He locked the heavy front door behind him like a terrified child. Less than a minute later, my personal cell phone buzzed aggressively across the sleek surface of Roth's desk. The caller identification displayed my wife's name. I answered the call and pressed the speaker button. Ivonne was crying hysterically into the receiver. She abandoned her usual elitist tone and begged me for immediate financial salvation. She screamed that violent armed men had just attacked our precious son-in-law on our front porch. She demanded I immediately wire $300,000 to pay off the dangerous criminals waiting outside our gate. She claimed Hunter would be brutally murdered if I did not clear his illicit debt right now. I listened to her frantic sobbing echo through the quiet Nevada office. I felt absolutely no pity for her sudden desperation. I spoke with a cold and calculated emotional detachment. I firmly reminded her that Hunter was supposedly a brilliant real estate technology genius. I told her that a highly successful entrepreneur should easily be able to use his own massive angel investments to solve his personal street problems. I suggested she ask her brilliant son-in-law to generate the required funds using his corporate expertise. Ivonne shrieked that this was not a joking matter and that lives were actively at stake. I informed her that she had permanently chosen her side during the family reunion barbecue. I told her she had explicitly ordered me to leave the property forever. I informed her I was simply honoring her strict final ultimatum. I reached down and quickly tapped the red glowing icon on the bright glass screen. I completely disconnected the active call and firmly blocked her primary contact number forever. My computer monitor chimed loudly with a high-priority alert from my surveillance operative. The private investigator forwarded a highly detailed and critical textual update, accompanied by 3 clear digital photographs. The first image showed Ivonne aggressively stepping out of a black rideshare vehicle in downtown Atlanta. The second photograph captured her purposefully marching directly up the wide concrete steps of the Fulton County Courthouse. The final picture documented her standing aggressively at the probate clerk's filing window. The investigator confirmed my absolute worst suspicions through his secure message. Ivonne was physically submitting the fabricated medical documents. She was officially filing the fraudulent dementia paperwork to forcefully seize my financial assets and revoke my legal independence. She believed the loan sharks were a direct result of my frozen funds rather than Hunter's massive failures. She decided the only way to save her precious son-in-law was to legally destroy my mind and steal my entire estate through a corrupt guardianship order. She had officially crossed the absolute point of no return. She had chosen total and uncompromising war over 40 years of marital loyalty. I looked up from the computer screen and met Roth's focused gaze. I instructed my attorney to immediately book 3 first-class commercial airline flights for our upcoming legal counteroffensive. I refused to let an elitist country club wife and a desperate tech fraud dictate the final terms of my personal life anymore. I picked up my phone and opened my encrypted medical contact directory. I needed absolute and undeniable scientific proof to crush her fabricated medical petition in open court. I dialed a premium private medical concierge service located in downtown Reno. I successfully scheduled extensive cognitive evaluations with 3 independent board-certified neurologists in Nevada for the very next morning to completely and thoroughly obliterate all their lies. I sat in the sterile white examination room of the very first private clinic at exactly 7 in the morning. The Nevada sun was barely rising, but my mind was completely sharp. I underwent the most grueling and comprehensive cognitive evaluations available in modern medicine. The board-certified neurologists did not hold back. They strapped me into heavy MRI machines and ran extensive brain scans to map my neurological pathways. I sat through hours of rigorous psychological assessments. I solved complex logic puzzles designed to detect even the slightest hint of cognitive decline. I recalled obscure memory sequences and completed rapid-fire spatial reasoning tests. I treated the medical gauntlet with the exact same relentless focus I used to build my commercial logistics empire. I did not fail a single metric. By early afternoon, I had visited all 3 independent specialists across Reno. They reviewed my perfect scores with genuine professional admiration. I passed every single assessment with flying colors. I proved beyond any shadow of a legal or medical doubt that my brain was functioning at absolute peak capacity. I stood at the reception desks and collected my official results. I secured 3 distinct legally binding and fully notarized certificates of absolute mental competence. The thick stack of medical paperwork in my hands was my ultimate armor. Hunter and Ivonne had bet their entire fraudulent scheme on the assumption that an old plumber would easily succumb to a fake dementia diagnosis. They assumed I would simply accept my fate and surrender my hard-earned wealth. They vastly underestimated my strict discipline. I walked out of the 3rd clinic and headed straight back to the Nevada Financial District. I held the undeniable scientific proof required to completely obliterate their malicious extortion plot in open court. My mind remained an impenetrable iron fortress today. I returned to the law office and placed the 3 notarized medical certificates directly onto the heavy mahogany desk. Attorney Roth picked up the pristine documents and verified the official raised seals. A sudden notification chimed sharply from his dedicated legal communications portal. Roth opened the digital inbox and clicked the urgent incoming message. He stared at the screen with a grim and highly focused expression. The Fulton County court system had just issued a formal electronic notification. Yvonne's emergency guardianship petition had been officially received and rapidly processed by a sympathetic clerk. The corrupt judge had already granted her a preliminary hearing date. Roth downloaded the attached legal PDF file and spun his monitor around so I could read the text. The fraudulent document claimed I suffered from rapid and severe cognitive decline, making me a massive danger to my own physical safety. I scrolled down to the bottom of the final page to find the medical authorization signature. The fake diagnosis was officially stamped and signed by a man named Dr. Eris Thorne. I did not recognize the name at all. I had never visited his clinic or spoken to him in my entire life. I instructed Roth to immediately dig into the physician's professional and personal history. Roth deployed his private investigative team to execute a deep and ruthless background check on Dr. Thorne. We needed to know exactly why a licensed medical professional would risk his entire career to sign a fabricated psychiatric evaluation for a total stranger. Roth accessed specialized financial databases and reviewed restricted court records. The initial data began populating on his screen within minutes. The digital footprint left by the corrupt doctor painted a highly desperate picture. Thorne was a man currently drowning in massive institutional financial debt completely alone right now. The comprehensive background check exposed the complete and utter destruction of Dr. Thorne's medical career. Roth read the shocking financial details aloud from his glowing computer screen. Thorne was actively facing 3 severe malpractice lawsuits from former clinical patients. His medical license was suspended pending a massive state board investigation. He owed hundreds of thousands of dollars in unpaid legal fees and crushing business loans. The private investigator in Atlanta dug much deeper into the physician's dark underworld connections. He cross-referenced Thorne's primary creditors with the local criminal syndicates operating in the city. He hit a massive digital jackpot within 20 minutes. The investigator uncovered that Dr. Thorne owed a catastrophic amount of money to the exact same violent loan shark currently hunting Hunter across Atlanta. The terrifying pieces of the criminal puzzle finally snapped together perfectly. Hunter had not randomly selected a physician to forge my medical records. Hunter had actively brokered a highly illegal underworld deal to save his own life. Hunter offered the desperate doctor a massive cut of my stolen $12 million estate in direct exchange for the fake dementia diagnosis. Thorne agreed to sign the fraudulent psychiatric papers to quickly pay off his own deadly street debt. They believed they could outsmart me by colluding together to drain my ironclad trust fund. They mistakenly assumed I was completely ignorant of their complex extortion tactics. They did not realize that exposing their criminal connection gave me the exact leverage I needed to destroy them both permanently. I looked at the glaring financial records displayed on the screen. The corrupt doctor thought he had found a brilliant exit strategy by participating in this vicious family betrayal. He had actually just handed me the absolute power to legally crush his remaining livelihood without any mercy right here today now. I made a highly calculated financial move to trap the corrupt physician. I instructed Attorney Roth to immediately contact an aggressive commercial debt acquisition firm located in Georgia. I authorized the transfer of significant liquid funds directly from my secure Nevada trust account. Using the immense purchasing power of my corporate holding company, I legally bought out Dr. Thorne's primary business debts. I purchased the outstanding balances on his clinic equipment and his overdue commercial lease. I acquired his financial obligations for pennies on the dollar from his panicked creditors. Within 2 hours, the complex legal paperwork was fully finalized and completely authorized. I was now the doctor's sole and uncompromising creditor. I held absolute and total control over his entire financial future. If he failed to pay me immediately, I possessed the legal authority to seize his medical clinic and liquidate all his remaining professional assets. I did not plan to offer him a standard repayment plan or show him any leniency. He tried to destroy my life for a quick payout. Now I owned his life completely. I ordered Roth to execute the final, devastating strike of the morning. I sat back and watched as my lawyer finalized the merciless documents. I instructed Roth to send a specialized legal courier directly to Dr. Thorne's medical office in downtown Atlanta. The armed courier carried a formal legal demand for the immediate and total payment of his massive outstanding business debt in full. I ensured the heavy delivery envelope also contained a printed copy of the federal wire fraud report we had filed with the FBI Cybercrime Division. I wanted the corrupt doctor to know exactly who currently held his leash before the real legal nightmare truly began for him today, right now, in his very own private office today. The specialized legal courier walked straight past the receptionist at Dr. Eris Thorne's medical clinic and handed him the heavy envelope. I sat in Attorney Roth's private office in Nevada and waited for the inevitable reaction. It took exactly 14 minutes. Roth's private office line began to ring frantically. Roth answered and immediately placed the call on the central speakerphone. Dr. Thorne was hyperventilating on the other end of the line. He begged Roth for a 60-day extension on the massive commercial debt I had just purchased. He claimed he was expecting a large influx of capital by the end of the week. He was obviously referencing the illegal payout Hunter had promised him. I leaned forward and spoke directly into the microphone. I introduced myself as the man he had just legally diagnosed with severe cognitive decline. Thorne went absolutely silent. The sound of his rapid breathing filled the room. I informed him that I now personally owned his clinic equipment and his commercial lease. I told him I also possessed a complete copy of the federal wire fraud report naming Hunter as the primary suspect. I explained that the FBI would undoubtedly uncover the financial link between them during their federal investigation. Thorne broke down immediately. He pleaded for mercy and swore he did not want to go to federal prison. I told him he had exactly one option to save his medical license and his personal freedom. I demanded a full and unedited video confession. He needed to detail exactly how my wife and my son-in-law bribed him to fabricate my dementia diagnosis. I told him if he provided this sworn statement, I would completely forgive his crushing commercial debt. If he refused, I would destroy his entire life immediately, right here and right now today. Dr. Thorne agreed to my harsh demands immediately. He was completely terrified of spending a decade inside a federal penitentiary. I signaled Roth to dispatch our private investigator directly to the medical clinic. The investigator arrived 20 minutes later, accompanied by a certified legal notary. He walked straight into the private examination room and locked the heavy door behind him. He set up a high-definition digital camera on a sturdy tripod. Dr. Thorne sat in his white medical coat. His hands were shaking violently as he stared into the dark camera lens. The notary officially verified his legal identity and started the formal recording. Thorne confessed to absolutely everything on tape. He clearly stated his full name and his professional license number. He openly admitted that he had never physically met me or evaluated my cognitive health. He detailed the exact financial arrangement he made with Hunter. Hunter promised him $40,000 in cash from my stolen estate. Thorne confessed that my wife Ivonne personally delivered the fraudulent legal paperwork for him to sign. He explained how they planned to use his fabricated medical diagnosis to seize my remaining assets through a corrupt guardianship order. He provided the exact dates and times of their secret meetings. The private investigator did not interrupt the doctor. He let the terrified man bury his co-conspirators with undeniable verbal evidence. The confession lasted for 20 agonizing minutes. The notary stamped the physical transcript of the spoken declaration. The investigator stopped the digital recording and secured the memory card inside a locked briefcase. He left the cold medical clinic without offering the corrupt and completely broken physician a single final word of comfort. He immediately transmitted the massive digital video file directly to Roth via a highly secure encrypted private network server connection today. Roth successfully downloaded the heavy digital video file onto his highly secure desktop computer. We watched the full unedited confession together in absolute silence. The malicious guardianship petition was no longer a valid legal threat against my personal freedom. It was now a devastating ticking time bomb sitting directly under my wife. The moment Ivonne stepped into a courtroom to present that fabricated medical document, she would face immediate federal perjury charges. I instructed Roth to hold the video confession file securely in reserve. I shifted my entire strategic focus directly toward the Atlanta house situation. Hunter had completely drained the $300,000 credit line to pay his violent underworld debt. He obviously possessed no legitimate corporate income to make the massive required monthly payments. Because the financial loan documents were officially forged, the aggressive commercial bank was actively preparing to initiate immediate property foreclosure proceedings. They intended to forcefully seize the primary collateral to recoup their massive stolen capital. I refused to let a greedy bank steal the beautiful family home I had personally paid for 15 years ago. I decided to launch a massive preemptive legal strike to permanently protect my physical property. I owned the house completely outright before the fraudulent loan was ever initiated. I needed to instantly strip my wife of any potential remaining marital claim to the structure. I instructed Roth to prepare the exact documents required to completely insulate the property from the impending banking disaster. The bank wanted to aggressively foreclose on my name. Ivonne wanted to forcefully steal the estate using my name. I realized the only logical defensive strategy was to rapidly ensure that my personal name was no longer legally tied to the physical property at all in any legal capacity moving forward from this exact moment. I instructed Roth to immediately draft a specialized quitclaim deed document for the Atlanta property. I held the sole legal ownership of the house because I purchased it completely before Ivonne and I were ever married. I rapidly signed the heavy digital paperwork in Roth's office. I legally transferred the entire physical property title directly into the absolute protective shield of my Nevada trust. The house was now officially owned by an untouchable corporate entity. Ivonne possessed absolutely zero remaining legal claim to the property. The aggressive commercial bank could no longer foreclose on my personal name because I technically no longer owned the physical structure. I completely neutralized their impending financial attack with a single signature. I turned my attention back to my treacherous wife. She was actively plotting to lock me inside a psychiatric medical ward to steal my entire estate. I decided it was time to permanently remove her from my property. I ordered Roth to quickly draft a formal 30-day legal notice to completely vacate the premises. Ivonne was now legally classified as an unwanted squatter occupying a corporate-owned building. I refused to simply mail the eviction notice to the house. I wanted her to feel the exact same public humiliation she forced me to endure at the family barbecue. I targeted her precious, fragile social status directly. Ivonne was scheduled to attend a highly exclusive charity luncheon at Derek's Elite Country Club today. I hired a relentless and highly aggressive private process server operating in Atlanta. I provided him with Yvonne's exact physical description and her precise location. I gave the server one specific strict instruction. He was ordered to march directly into the crowded dining room and hand Ivonne the formal eviction notice right in the middle of her wealthy elite ladies' luncheon today. Ivonne sat at the very center of the head table in the crystal-lit dining room of the Atlanta Country Club. She held a crystal champagne flute and projected the perfect image of a burdened but noble matriarch. She complained loudly to her circle of wealthy elite friends about the intense daily stress of managing her severely sick husband. She spun a tragic and deeply fabricated tale about my sudden mental decline and how she was bravely stepping up to handle our complicated estate. Her wealthy friends nodded with deep manufactured sympathy and praised her incredible strength. The private process server I hired did not wear a discreet uniform. He wore a sharp black suit and moved with intense, unyielding purpose. He bypassed the club's strict security desk and marched directly across the crowded dining room floor. He walked straight up to Yvonne's perfectly arranged table. He did not ask for permission to interrupt her fake tragic monologue. He slammed a thick, heavy legal folder directly down onto her pristine designer salad plate. The heavy thud echoed loudly across the quiet dining room. He stood tall and announced in a booming, highly projected voice that she was officially served. He declared loudly for every single elite woman at the table to hear that Ivonne had exactly 30 days to entirely vacate the residential property. He explicitly stated that the house was legally owned and protected by my Nevada Commercial Trust. The server spun on his heel and marched right back out the front doors without looking back. He left the heavy eviction notice resting right on top of her ruined lunch. The process server's loud declaration completely shattered Yvonne's carefully constructed narrative in a matter of seconds. Yvonne stared down at the heavy legal folder resting on her crushed salad greens. The bright color completely drained from her carefully powdered face. She reached out with trembling fingers and ripped open the thick envelope to read the bold legal print. The formal eviction notice clearly and undeniably stripped her of any right to occupy the Atlanta property. Her entire circle of wealthy country club friends stared at her in absolute and deeply shocked silence. The pristine illusion of her noble sacrifice was shattered instantly by the harsh legal reality of an eviction notice. She could not formulate a single coherent excuse to explain the public humiliation to her peers. She snatched the folder off the table and ran out of the dining room in a state of sheer blinding panic. She sprinted to her luxury vehicle parked outside and locked herself inside the leather interior. She immediately dialed her son Derek. Yvonne cried hysterically into the phone and screamed that I had just publicly destroyed her entire social standing. She told Derek about the brutal eviction notice and the shocking revelation of the Nevada trust ownership. Derek exploded with absolute rage on the other end of the line. He viewed his family's reputation as his own personal corporate currency. My aggressive legal strike directly threatened the pristine facade he utilized to secure massive commercial loans for his own business. He demanded she calm down and stop crying immediately. He assured her that he would put an end to my sudden rebellion today. He promised his mother that he was going to handle me personally and force me to surrender. He believed his aggressive business tactics would easily intimidate an old man into backing down from this escalating legal war today. My private secure cell phone rang less than 20 minutes after the country club confrontation. The caller identification boldly displayed Derek's personal phone number. I answered the call and calmly placed the device on speakerphone while Roth sat across the desk taking detailed legal notes. Derek completely bypassed any form of polite greeting. He unleashed a furious and highly aggressive verbal assault the moment the line connected. He threatened to personally buy a plane ticket to Nevada tonight. He promised to physically drag me out of my hotel room by my collar and force me back to Atlanta. He swore he would drag me kicking and screaming into the darkest state-run psychiatric facility he could find. He claimed he had enough local influence and money to keep me locked inside a padded medical room until the day I died. I did not interrupt his violent and unhinged rant. I let him scream until he finally ran out of breath. I sat forward and spoke with a cold and absolutely deadpan tone. I calmly informed my arrogant son that making explicit physical threats of violence across state lines constituted a severe federal offense. I reminded him that every single incoming call on this secure business line was legally recorded and archived by my attorney. I told him he had just handed the federal authorities undeniable proof of interstate criminal coercion. Derek went completely silent on the other end of the connection. The sudden realization that he had just incriminated himself on a recorded line instantly crushed his aggressive momentum. He thought he could bully a weak old man into submission. He did not expect me to weaponize the federal legal code directly against his reckless anger today. I decided it was time to permanently execute the financial trap I had built specifically for him years ago. Derek desperately needed prime commercial real estate to launch his luxury car dealership when he first started. He proudly bragged to his friends that he secured a massive plot of prime commercial land through a brilliant independent negotiation. He leased the expensive property from a massive silent commercial holding company located entirely out of state. He never knew that I had secretly created that specific holding company specifically to secure his future. I had quietly purchased the land and offered him an incredibly lenient lease rate to ensure his business succeeded without my name attached. I was the silent majority shareholder and absolute owner of the very ground his multi-million-dollar inventory sat upon. I revealed this heavily guarded financial reality to him over the open phone line. I told Derek that the uneducated blue-collar father he openly mocked was actually his ultimate corporate landlord. Derek gasped loudly into the receiver as the catastrophic truth finally hit him. I did not give him a single second to process the revelation. I tapped my keyboard and executed a pre-written email directly to his corporate inbox. I informed him that I had just officially transmitted a formal notice of commercial lease termination. I legally revoked his corporate tenancy without any option for renegotiation or appeal. The contract he originally signed contained an ironclad termination clause I could activate at my sole discretion. I gave Derek exactly 60 days to completely vacate the property and move his entire massive inventory of luxury vehicles off my land. If a single car remained on the lot by the deadline, I would legally seize his inventory. I ended the call permanently and left him in total ruin. Derek slammed his heavy fists onto his expensive glass desk. The formal lease termination notice glowed on his computer monitor. His entire luxury car dealership was completely and undeniably doomed. He possessed exactly 60 days to liquidate a massive inventory of imported vehicles or face total financial ruin. His corporate empire was built on land he did not own, and the true landlord had just pulled the plug permanently. Derek did not internalize his failure. He immediately redirected his explosive rage directly toward Hunter. He realized that Hunter's pathetic greed and sloppy extortion attempts had triggered this catastrophic chain reaction. Hunter had arrogantly poked a sleeping bear, and Derek was paying the ultimate price. Hunter stood near the office door, sweating profusely. He attempted to stammer out a weak excuse about the temporary guardianship delay. Derek cut him off with a vicious string of insults. He told Hunter he was a pathetic failure who had destroyed the entire family's future. Derek ordered his former golden boy out of his office forever. He threatened to hand Hunter over to the loan sharks personally if he ever showed his face at the dealership again. Hunter stumbled out into the hot Atlanta afternoon completely out of options. The violent loan sharks were actively hunting him down. The FBI Cybercrime Division was actively investigating his digital wire fraud. His own family had just violently abandoned him. He knew Dr. Thorne had already betrayed him to save his medical license. The walls were rapidly closing in from every possible direction. Hunter realized he could not simply talk his way out of a federal indictment or a violent street debt. He made the immediate and desperate decision to flee the country entirely today. Hunter sped back to the Atlanta property in a sheer panic. He sprinted past the heavy front doors and ran directly upstairs to the master bedroom. He pulled a large leather duffel bag from the closet and began frantically packing his most expensive designer clothes. He opened his laptop and bypassed the shared financial security protocols. He accessed Kendra's private personal savings account. He executed an immediate and unauthorized wire transfer. He completely drained the final $30,000 she had managed to hide from the loan sharks. He did not care that he was leaving his wife entirely destitute. He only cared about securing enough liquid cash to disappear across the southern border permanently. Kendra suddenly walked into the bedroom holding a pile of folded laundry. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the open duffel bag and the glowing bank transfer confirmation on the screen. She dropped the clothes and demanded to know exactly where they were going in such a massive rush. Hunter did not look up from packing his expensive watches. He zipped the bag shut and told her coldly that they were not going anywhere together. He informed her that he was leaving alone on a one-way flight to Mexico tonight. Kendra stared at him in absolute shock. She asked how he could possibly abandon her after everything she had done to support his fake business. Hunter laughed bitterly. He told her she was completely useless to him without her father's $12 million. He stated she was just a pathetic means to a highly lucrative end. He grabbed the heavy leather bag and marched straight toward the bedroom door. Kendra lunged forward and physically blocked the bedroom doorway. She spread her arms wide and screamed that he could not simply steal her entire life savings and abandon her to the loan sharks. She demanded he stay and face the massive consequences of his own disastrous actions. Hunter did not attempt to negotiate or reason with her. The desperate coward simply lowered his shoulder and violently shoved his wife out of his path. The brutal impact sent Kendra crashing hard onto the solid hardwood floor. She screamed in pain as her shoulder struck the heavy wooden bed frame. Hunter completely ignored her suffering. He stepped right over her crying body. He quickly grabbed his passport and the thick envelope of stolen cash off the dresser. He did not offer a single word of apology or look back at the woman he had manipulated for years. During the violent physical struggle, Kendra's mobile phone had tumbled out of her pocket and skidded across the floor. The heavy impact had accidentally activated her recent contacts list and automatically connected a direct voice call to my private number. I sat in Roth's Nevada office holding the receiver to my ear in total silence. I heard the entire violent assault broadcast live over the open line. I heard Hunter's cold and heartless insults. I heard the sickening thud of my daughter hitting the floor. I heard her agonizing screams of physical pain echo clearly through the speaker. The complex financial war I had meticulously orchestrated was instantly shattered by the brutal reality of domestic violence. I remained completely silent on the line as I listened to the aftermath of the assault. I heard Kendra sobbing uncontrollably on the bedroom floor. I heard Hunter's heavy footsteps pounding down the wooden staircase. I heard the heavy mahogany front door slam shut with a violent and echoing crash. Seconds later, the aggressive roar of his luxury sports car engine completely faded away down the long asphalt driveway. He had successfully fled the property and left my daughter completely broken and alone. The blood running through my veins turned absolutely ice cold. My hands clenched into tight, rigid fists. The calculated corporate chess game I had played against my treacherous family was officially over. Hunter had crossed the ultimate and unforgivable line. I did not care about the forged bank documents or the stolen investment money anymore. I did not care about Yvonne's pathetic country club humiliation or Derek's ruined car dealership. This conflict had just become deeply and violently personal. I could never simply sit in a safe Nevada high-rise and leave my daughter in physical danger, regardless of her previous financial betrayal. She was still my child, and she was currently bleeding on a hardwood floor because of a coward I had allowed into her life. I lowered the phone and looked directly across the wide desk at Attorney Roth. The time for serving polite legal notices and executing clever corporate buyouts was entirely finished. I ordered Roth to immediately contact the private security firm guarding the Atlanta property and instruct them to lock down the perimeter completely. I commanded Roth to charter the fastest private jet available at the Reno airport. I was flying back to Atlanta with my armed security team immediately today. The chartered Gulfstream jet touched down on the private tarmac at the Atlanta International Airport just after sunset. I did not waste a single second inside the luxury aircraft. The heavy cabin door lowered, and I stepped directly out into the thick Georgia humidity. My elite private security commander was already waiting on the dark concrete runway with two black armored SUVs idling quietly. I climbed into the back seat of the lead vehicle and instructed the driver to head straight for my residential neighborhood. We tore through the city traffic with absolute military precision. I checked the live surveillance feed on my phone one final time. The tactical perimeter around my property was still active, but the situation had severely escalated. We turned onto my familiar affluent street and approached my large brick house. Two heavily dented utility vehicles were currently parked horizontally across my driveway. They intentionally blocked the main gate to prevent anyone from leaving. The violent loan sharks had returned in full force to aggressively hunt down Hunter today. 5 aggressive street thugs stood on my manicured front lawn. They carried heavy steel crowbars and kept their right hands resting dangerously close to their concealed waistbands. They were actively shouting violent threats at the dark windows of my house and demanding my son-in-law show his face immediately. They believed they were dealing with a terrified suburban family who would easily surrender to basic street intimidation tactics. They had absolutely no idea exactly who was sitting inside the approaching armored convoy. My driver aggressively accelerated and slammed on the heavy brakes right behind their blocked vehicles. The sudden screech of heavy tires instantly silenced the shouting thugs. They turned around and glared at my convoy with hostile confusion. The doors of both armored SUVs swung open simultaneously. 8 of my highly trained tactical security operatives stepped out onto the asphalt. They completely outnumbered and vastly outgunned the desperate street thugs. My men fanned out in a strict tactical formation and immediately placed their hands on their exposed military-grade rifles. The sudden display of overwhelming lethal force instantly and completely neutralized the aggressive loan sharks. The thugs dropped their heavy crowbars onto the grass and slowly raised their empty hands into the air. They realized instantly that stepping toward my vehicles would be a fatal mistake. I stepped out of the back seat and adjusted my jacket. I walked straight up my driveway and passed directly through the middle of the frozen criminals. I did not look at them or acknowledge their presence. I was completely unbothered by their pathetic intimidation tactics. I pulled my physical key from my pocket and unlocked my heavy mahogany front door. I pushed the door open and stepped into the main foyer. The interior of the house was completely trashed. Broken glass and shattered porcelain vases littered the expensive hardwood floor. Drawers were violently ripped from their tracks and designer clothes were scattered everywhere. Hunter had torn the place apart, looking for anything of value before his cowardly escape. I found Kendra sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by the chaotic wreckage. A dark purple bruise was already forming rapidly along her left cheekbone where her husband had violently shoved her. She was crying silently into her hands. I could hear Ivonne sobbing hysterically from down the hall. My wife had locked herself securely inside the downstairs guest bathroom. She was utterly terrified of the violent men shouting outside and completely paralyzed by her own selfish fear. I completely ignored Yvonne's frantic, muffled sobbing coming from the locked downstairs bathroom. I walked directly into the ruined living room and knelt down carefully beside my daughter. I did not offer her empty words of comfort or hollow emotional reassurances. I looked her directly in the eyes and ordered her to stand up immediately. I instructed Kendra to walk upstairs and pack exactly one single travel bag with her essential personal belongings. She looked up at me with tears streaming down her bruised face. She grabbed my arm and began apologizing profusely for her terrible financial choices. She cried that she was incredibly sorry for choosing a fraudulent, arrogant husband over her own devoted father. She begged me to forgive her for blindly participating in his massive corporate lies. I gently but firmly removed her trembling hand from my jacket sleeve. I told my daughter that true apologies require definitive action and not just desperate tears. I informed her that she had exactly 5 minutes to gather her things before I permanently abandoned the property. Kendra wiped her bruised face and ran up the wooden staircase without another word of complaint. She returned to the foyer exactly 4 minutes later carrying a small black canvas duffel bag. I signaled to my security commander standing just outside the open front doorway. 2 heavy armed operatives stepped inside the house and flanked my daughter perfectly. I escorted Kendra out of the ruined building and walked her directly down the front concrete steps. My security personnel formed a tight protective human shield around us as we moved across the lawn. We walked safely past the frozen and terrified loan sharks. My men securely placed my crying daughter inside the heavily armored back seat of the primary black SUV. The heavy front door suddenly swung open again just as I placed my hand on the vehicle handle. Ivonne ran out onto the front porch with a completely panicked expression. She saw Kendra sitting safely inside my secure convoy and immediately demanded to come with us. She screamed at me to let her into the armored vehicle and save her from the violent criminals standing in the driveway. I turned around and looked at my treacherous wife with absolute icy detachment. I did not take a single step back toward the brick house. I loudly reminded Ivonne that she had a very important legal appointment scheduled for tomorrow morning. I told her she needed to stay perfectly rested for her emergency county court hearing where she officially planned to declare me completely mentally insane. I informed her that taking a ride with a severely demented man would deeply contradict her fabricated legal paperwork. She stared at me in pure, horrified silence as the ultimate reality of her failed extortion plot finally crushed her. She realized I knew absolutely everything about the fake psychiatric documents she filed today. I told her to sit tight and enjoy her massive empty house. I climbed into the heavy SUV and slammed the thick armored door completely shut. I ordered the driver to accelerate immediately. Our vehicles reversed out of the street and left the property entirely. I looked back through the tinted rear window as we drove away into the dark Atlanta night. Ivonne was left standing completely alone on the front porch. The armed loan sharks realized my security team was entirely gone. They instantly turned their violent attention directly toward my wife and began aggressively kicking the heavy mahogany front door to collect their stolen money. The morning sun rose over the Atlanta skyline, but it brought absolutely no warmth to the cold concrete steps of the Fulton County Courthouse. Ivonne sat at the heavy wooden table inside the crowded courtroom looking completely disheveled and entirely terrified. She wore dark, oversized sunglasses to hide her puffy eyes from the long, sleepless night. The heavy makeup could not conceal the sheer panic radiating from her trembling hands. She sat next to a cheap, heavily sweating local attorney she had hired at the absolute last minute. She clutched her fake designer handbag like a desperate shield against the impending legal slaughter. I did not enter the room quietly. I pushed open the heavy oak doors exactly 3 minutes before the scheduled hearing. I walked straight down the center aisle wearing a perfectly tailored dark charcoal suit. I moved with total absolute authority and unyielding purpose. I was not the confused, sick old man she had maliciously described in her fraudulent paperwork. I was entirely lucid, completely powerful, and in absolute control of the entire situation. Attorney Roth walked perfectly in step beside me, carrying a slim, sleek leather briefcase. We sat down at the opposing defense table, and I stared directly across the room at my treacherous wife. Ivonne refused to meet my gaze. She shrank down into her heavy wooden chair as if attempting to completely disappear from reality. The stern elderly judge finally entered the quiet courtroom and loudly commanded everyone to sit. The ultimate legal confrontation had officially begun today, right now. The judge adjusted his reading glasses and formally called the emergency guardianship hearing to order. Yvonne's nervous attorney stood up and fumbled awkwardly with his disorganized stack of legal papers. He presented the fraudulent petition to the court with a shaky and unconvincing voice. He loudly claimed that I suffered from rapid and severe cognitive decline. He stated I was a massive danger to my own physical safety and entirely incapable of managing my substantial financial estate. He then confidently submitted the heavily stamped medical evaluation officially signed by Dr. Eris Thorne as his primary piece of undeniable scientific evidence. He argued that the court must immediately strip me of my legal independence and grant my wife total control over all my assets to protect my well-being. The attorney finished his dramatic opening statement and sat back down heavily beside Ivonne. He believed he had just presented an airtight medical case. The judge slowly reviewed the submitted paperwork and frowned deeply at the severe diagnosis. He looked across the courtroom directly at my defense table. He asked Roth if we had any formal rebuttal to the aggressive medical claims presented today. I sat perfectly still with my hands folded calmly on the table. I did not show a single ounce of fear or intimidation. I simply nodded at Roth. My attorney stood up slowly and buttoned his expensive suit jacket. He did not immediately launch into a loud, passionate argument or loudly object to the opposing counsel's statements. He simply requested permission to approach the heavy wooden bench today. Roth walked confidently up to the judge's elevated bench carrying his sleek leather briefcase. He opened it and pulled out a thick stack of pristine, legally binding documents. He calmly handed the judge the 3 certified and fully notarized cognitive evaluations I had secured in Nevada just yesterday. He clearly explained that these grueling medical assessments were conducted by 3 independent, highly respected, board-certified neurologists. He pointed out that I had passed every single metric, with absolutely perfect scores proving undeniable mental competence. The judge quickly scanned the top-tier medical reports, and his heavy brow deeply furrowed in complete confusion. The Nevada evaluations entirely contradicted the severe dementia diagnosis submitted by Yvonne's attorney. Roth did not stop there. He pulled a thin digital tablet from his briefcase and activated the high-definition screen. He placed the electronic device directly in front of the judge. He quietly informed the court that the tablet contained a sworn and fully unedited video confession from Dr. Eris Thorne. He pressed play on the digital file and stepped back respectfully. The judge leaned forward and watched the entire 20-minute recording in absolute silence. He saw the corrupt physician clearly admit that he had never physically examined me or evaluated my cognitive health. He heard Thorne confess to accepting a massive $40,000 cash bribe from Hunter to intentionally fabricate the devastating medical diagnosis. He watched the doctor detail exactly how Ivonne had personally delivered the fraudulent paperwork to steal my entire $12 million estate. The undeniable digital evidence completely destroyed their entire malicious extortion plot in open court today. The judge stared at the dark tablet screen as the video confession finally ended. His expression rapidly hardened from professional curiosity into absolute blinding fury. The heavy silence in the courtroom was terrifyingly thick. He slowly lifted his head and glared directly at Ivonne with an intense and unyielding rage. He realized instantly that his honorable court had been maliciously weaponized for a disgusting criminal extortion plot. He recognized that my wife had intentionally lied under federal oath to forcefully steal a massive fortune. Yvonne's chief attorney immediately recognized the catastrophic legal danger. He stood up rapidly and physically stepped completely away from his client. He loudly declared to the furious judge that he had been entirely lied to and deeply manipulated by his client. He frantically tried to save his own legal license by throwing Yvonne directly under the proverbial bus. Yvonne sat completely frozen in her wooden chair. She was entirely trapped in a legal nightmare of her own creation. The judge did not accept any excuses or apologies today. He violently slammed his heavy wooden gavel down onto the sounding block. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot through the silent room. He loudly declared that the fraudulent emergency guardianship petition was entirely and permanently thrown out of his court. He did not stop there. He immediately signaled the 2 armed bailiffs standing near the exit doors. He explicitly ordered them to physically detain my wife right now. He loudly declared that Yvonne was officially under arrest for blatant perjury and attempting to massively defraud a federal court today. The heavy steel handcuffs locked shut around Yvonne's wrists with a sharp and resounding click. The physical reality of her sudden arrest completely shattered her carefully maintained aristocratic facade. She instantly transformed from a proud society matron into a desperate and hysterical criminal. She struggled violently against the grip of the two armed court bailiffs. She screamed at the top of her lungs that the entire fraudulent guardianship petition was entirely Hunter's brilliant idea. She loudly blamed her arrogant son-in-law for orchestrating the massive medical extortion plot and claimed she was merely a helpless victim of his highly toxic corporate manipulation. She realized the furious judge was completely ignoring her frantic excuses. She frantically turned her desperate attention directly toward me. She begged me to speak up and defend her character immediately. She pleaded for me to tell the honorable court that she was a devoted and loving wife who only ever wanted the absolute best for her severely sick husband. I did not show a single ounce of mercy or compassion. I stood perfectly still behind the heavy wooden defense table. I slowly and methodically adjusted the crisp cuffs of my tailored suit jacket. I looked my treacherous wife directly in the eyes. I turned my attention respectfully toward the elevated bench. I spoke in a calm and deeply authoritative voice. I clearly informed the judge that I completely and unequivocally supported the court's swift decision to prosecute her blatant perjury to the fullest extent of federal law. I stated that her malicious attempt to steal my personal freedom and hijack my corporate estate deserved absolute judicial punishment. Ivonne gasped in sheer, unadulterated horror. She realized I was never going to rescue her from the devastating legal consequences of her own blinding greed entirely right here and now today. The presiding judge directed his unyielding fury away from Ivonne and focused entirely on the undeniable evidence of a massive criminal conspiracy. He recognized that the fraudulent medical documents submitted to his court required active coordination across multiple state jurisdictions. He immediately issued a formal and heavily prioritized bench warrant for the immediate arrest of Hunter. The judge explicitly cited the undeniable forgery of federally regulated medical records and the blatant attempt to defraud a protected corporate estate as absolute grounds for immediate incarceration. He ordered local law enforcement to treat the fugitive as an extreme flight risk. The armed bailiffs forcefully escorted Ivonne out of the courtroom. She dragged her feet and sobbed uncontrollably as they marched her directly into a cold concrete holding cell located inside the basement of the courthouse. Her expensive designer dress and pristine social reputation meant absolutely nothing inside the sterile confines of the county jail. Roth quickly packed the certified neurological evaluations and the digital tablet back into his sleek leather briefcase. We walked out of the heavy oak doors and exited the silent courtroom together. We moved through the crowded courthouse lobby with absolute and unbothered confidence. We stepped out through the massive glass doors and walked directly into the bright Atlanta sun. I took a deep breath of the hot morning air. The initial and most crucial phase of my calculated counterattack was now officially and entirely complete. I had successfully defended my personal freedom and utterly destroyed the treacherous woman who actively attempted to lock me away. I knew I could not afford to rest or celebrate my courtroom victory today. I needed to shift my entire strategic focus toward locating the dangerous coward who had violently assaulted my daughter and completely stolen her entire life savings right now today. I directed my heavily armed security detail to drive my primary armored vehicle directly from the chaotic courthouse to the heavily guarded FBI field office located in downtown Atlanta. Kendra sat completely silent beside me in the spacious leather back seat, processing the total destruction of her fabricated reality. The heavy SUV smoothly bypassed the concrete security barricades and parked securely in the restricted federal lot. I escorted my daughter into the sterile glass lobby where 2 senior federal agents were already waiting. We sat down inside a secure, soundproof interrogation room. Kendra did not attempt to protect Hunter or minimize his massive criminal exposure. She looked the federal agents directly in the eyes and systematically dismantled her husband's entire digital existence. She provided the investigators with the exact numerical details of Hunter's hidden offshore bank accounts. She explicitly handed over his deeply encrypted administrative passwords and clearly mapped out his desperate physical escape route. She firmly informed the focused agents that Hunter was actively attempting to cross the southern Mexican border to completely evade his massive violent street debt. Kendra then reached inside her small canvas duffel bag and pulled out a sleek silver device. She slid Hunter's primary backup laptop directly across the cold metal table. She clearly explained that she had secretly grabbed the hidden computer from his private safe during the violent physical struggle in their bedroom. She absolutely knew the machine contained the unencrypted foundational architecture of his entire fake corporate operation. I sat silently in the corner of the cold room and watched my daughter finally utilize her intelligence to completely protect herself instead of blindly financing a violent coward. The federal agents immediately seized the physical evidence and rapidly summoned their specialized cyber unit to begin an extensive digital autopsy of his device today. The specialized FBI cybercrimes team immediately bypassed the basic hardware encryption and accessed the hard drive. They began systematically tearing through thousands of buried corporate files and hidden transaction ledgers. They rapidly unraveled the deeply embedded financial reality behind Hunter's entire fraudulent existence. They discovered undeniable digital proof that his heavily promoted tech startup was never actively building real estate software. The entire corporation was actually a highly complex and deeply illegal shell company constructed entirely to launder massive amounts of dirty money for the violent loan sharks. The agents realized that Hunter was not just a pathetic white-collar fraud who stole from his own father-in-law. He was officially classified as a high-level federal money launderer actively managing millions of dollars for a ruthless organized crime syndicate. The sheer scale of his federal felonies instantly elevated his case to an absolute national security priority. The lead agent stepped back into the interrogation room with a deeply grim expression. He informed me that the federal authorities were officially taking complete jurisdictional control over the entire investigation. The FBI immediately issued a massive nationwide federal manhunt alert for Hunter across all law enforcement agencies. They utilized his unencrypted laptop data to completely freeze his passport and permanently lock his remaining bank accounts. They digitally flagged his vehicle license plate and physical description at every single federal border crossing and international airport. He could no longer run or hide from the consequences of his extreme greed. The massive corporate war I had silently started to protect my hard-earned estate had officially culminated in a devastating federal indictment against the man who assaulted my daughter. Hunter was no longer just a greedy son-in-law trying to steal my cash. He was a heavily hunted fugitive trapped inside a rapidly shrinking federal cage right now. My secure phone illuminated with an incoming call from Derek. I accepted the connection and listened to the sound of rapid hyperventilation. The aggressive corporate bully who had threatened to drag me across state lines yesterday was completely gone. He had spent the last 12 hours frantically calling his commercial lawyers and his bank representatives. They all confirmed the devastating truth of his situation. The commercial lease termination notice I sent him was entirely ironclad. Derek had exactly 30 days to remove 200 luxury vehicles from the prime real estate lot. He was in a state of absolute blind panic. He frantically explained that relocating a massive luxury car inventory required months of advanced planning and highly specialized secure transport trucks. He cried that securing a new commercial lease with a comparable showroom would cost him millions of dollars he currently did not possess. His aggressive creditors were already calling him about the sudden loss of his primary business location. Derek begged me to reverse the termination order. He pleaded for a small measure of corporate mercy. He desperately attempted to invoke the concept of deep family loyalty. He swore he never actually intended to hurt me or force me into a psychiatric facility. He claimed he was simply stressed and spoke out of turn because Hunter had misled him. He promised to publicly apologize and cut all ties with Hunter and Ivonne if I just reinstated his commercial lease today. He was willing to sacrifice his own mother and his sister instantly to save his precious dealership. The sheer hypocrisy of his pleas deeply disgusted me. He only understood the concept of family loyalty when his own financial survival was in imminent danger. I let him finish his pathetic begging without ever interrupting a single panicked sentence today. I sat in the quiet cabin of the private jet and listened to my son weep over his ruined corporate empire. I did not offer him a single shred of paternal comfort or financial reassurance. I spoke with a quiet and completely unyielding authority. I transported his memory directly back to our family barbecue last month. I reminded him exactly how he had stood on my back patio holding a premium imported beer while wearing a custom suit I had indirectly financed. I recited the exact arrogant words he had spoken to his wealthy friends while laughing at my expense. I repeated his exact phrase stating that society always needs people to clean out the gutters. Derek went completely silent on the other end of the line. The crushing weight of his own profound arrogance finally suffocated his desperate excuses. I told him that he had spent his entire adult life standing on a golden pedestal I quietly built for him. I explained that his entire identity was funded by the silent corporate holding company he just tried to aggressively steal from. I informed my son that the golden pedestal was now officially smashed into 1,000 pieces. I advised him to head down to the local hardware store and purchase a sturdy shovel immediately. I told him he was going to need that shovel because his entire luxury business was officially residing in the gutter starting today. I did not wait for his inevitable response or listen to his subsequent apologies. I pressed the red end button on my digital screen and disconnected the active call permanently. I immediately blocked his personal number from my device. I completely severed my personal financial and emotional ties to a greedy son who valued his corporate image over his own father today. Ivonne spent a terrifying and deeply humiliating night inside the cold concrete holding cell at the Fulton County Jail. She was surrounded by hardened criminals who did not care about her elite country club status or her designer wardrobe. She desperately contacted a highly predatory local bail bondsman the next morning. She signed over the absolute last of her accessible personal jewelry just to secure her temporary physical release today. She exited the crowded downtown detention center looking completely broken and utterly exhausted. She paid for a cheap taxi ride back to the Atlanta property using the last few crumpled bills in her purse. She walked up the long driveway and entered the silent brick house, expecting to find a measure of domestic comfort. She flipped the heavy brass light switch in the grand foyer, but the crystal chandelier remained completely dark. She walked into the massive kitchen and turned the stainless steel faucet, but the plumbing pipes were entirely dry. I had contacted the local utility companies days ago and formally transferred the accounts completely out of my personal name. I legally terminated the electrical and water services to the property the moment the commercial trust assumed full ownership. Ivonne was now legally classified as an unwanted squatter occupying a corporate structure without any active utility provisions. The oppressive Georgia summer heat rapidly filled the stagnant interior of the large brick house. The heavy humidity settled over the expensive furniture and the ruined hardwood floors. Ivonne sat down heavily on a dark leather sofa in the middle of the sweltering living room. She was covered in cold sweat and trembling with profound isolation. She had completely lost her husband, her massive fortune, and her pristine social standing in less than 48 hours. She was entirely and completely ruined today. Ivonne reached into her purse and pulled out her dying mobile phone. She desperately dialed Derek's personal number, seeking an immediate financial rescue from the sweltering heat of the dead house. Derek answered the phone with a tone of pure, unadulterated venom. Ivonne begged her successful son to send a private car for her or wire emergency funds to restore the utilities. Derek screamed into the receiver with a volume that made her physically flinch. He told his mother that she had completely destroyed his entire life by blindly backing Hunter's incredible stupidity. He explained that his luxury dealership was facing imminent commercial eviction because of her malicious extortion plot against me. He blamed her directly for raising a daughter who married a federal money launderer and dragging the entire family into a massive criminal conspiracy. Ivonne sobbed and pleaded for a simple shred of maternal sympathy. Derek coldly informed her that he was permanently cutting his losses to save himself. He refused to give her a single dime of support and immediately blocked her phone number. Ivonne dropped her phone onto the expensive rug and wept loudly in the dark, suffocating room. She was completely isolated from the entire outside world. Heavy footsteps suddenly echoed on the wooden planks of the front porch. A loud, authoritative knock rattled the mahogany front door. Ivonne wiped her sweaty face and slowly opened the heavy door. A relentless private process server stood on the welcome mat holding a thick legal folder. He officially handed her my formal divorce petition. The legal document explicitly demanded absolutely zero spousal support or financial alimony due to her active criminal fraud and federal perjury charges. Ivonne sank down to her bare knees in the doorway as her entire greedy universe finally collapsed completely around her today. Hunter gripped the steering wheel of the rented gray sedan with white-knuckled intensity. The oppressive Texas heat radiated through the windshield as he sped southward toward the Mexican border. He wiped thick beads of sweat from his forehead and frantically checked his rearview mirror every few seconds. He was completely convinced that unmarked federal law enforcement vehicles were tailing him through the desolate stretches of highway. His chest heaved with shallow breaths. He desperately and urgently needed to cross the international boundary before the digital dragnet officially closed around his stolen identity. The rental car fuel gauge dipped dangerously close to empty as he approached a dilapidated gas station near the dusty edge of town. He jerked the steering wheel hard and skidded the sedan up to the rusted fuel pump. He frantically jumped out of the car and forcefully shoved a dark prepaid burner credit card directly into the cold, automated payment terminal. The machine processed the magnetic stripe for a brief, agonizing moment before emitting a harsh metallic beep. A bright red error message flashed across the digital display indicating the transaction was entirely declined. Hunter cursed violently and angrily punched the heavy metal terminal. He immediately reached into his wallet and produced a secondary corporate card hidden under a fake corporate alias. The machine rejected that payment method instantly as well. The devastating reality of his situation crashed down on his shoulders. The FBI Cybercrime Division had moved much faster than he ever anticipated. They had systematically located and completely frozen every single secondary financial account linked to his physical and digital footprint. He possessed absolutely no access to the millions of dollars he had illegally laundered for the violent underworld syndicate. He was officially and entirely cut off from the modern financial system and isolated today. Hunter scrambled back into the driver's seat and slammed the heavy car door shut. He desperately reached into the passenger seat and tore open the dark leather duffel bag. He frantically counted the remaining physical currency he had stolen directly from Kendra's own personal savings account. He possessed exactly $3,000 in loose physical cash to finance his entire permanent escape into a foreign country. He forcefully threw the vehicle into drive and sped down the long, empty highway toward the massive Laredo International Border checkpoint. The imposing steel canopy of the border crossing loomed over the horizon like a massive mechanical trap. He frantically forced himself to take deep breaths and slow his racing heartbeat. He reluctantly joined the incredibly long line of idling vehicles waiting to clear the strict federal inspection zone. He spent 30 agonizing minutes inching his rented sedan closer to the primary security booth. He finally pulled up to the illuminated window and rolled down the tinted glass. He forced a relaxed, confident smile and handed his American passport directly to the stern, unsmiling border agent. The uniformed officer took the blue booklet and swiped it through the secure federal database scanner without ever looking up. The digital monitor inside the small security booth instantly flashed a blinding warning red color. The agent did not say a single word to Hunter. He subtly tapped a hidden panic button beneath his heavy metal desk. 4 heavily armed Customs and Border Protection officers stepped out from behind the concrete barricades and surrounded the rented sedan instantly. They leveled their military-grade rifles directly at Hunter through the vehicle windows. The lead tactical officer commanded him over a loud megaphone to shut off the engine and place both of his empty hands flat against the steering wheel immediately. Hunter completely froze in sheer blinding terror. He entirely lacked the physical courage to resist the overwhelming lethal force pointed directly at his head. The heavy driver's side door was violently yanked open from the outside. 2 massive armed tactical officers reached into the cabin and forcefully grabbed him by his designer shirt collar. They ripped him completely out of the rented sedan and slammed him face first onto the searing, hot Texas pavement. The brutal physical impact knocked the breath entirely out of his lungs. Hunter desperately screamed that they were making a massive mistake. He thrashed his legs against the concrete and loudly declared that he was a highly successful, wealthy entrepreneur. He demanded his legal right to a phone call and loudly threatened to sue the entire federal agency for unwarranted assault. The hardened border agents completely ignored his pathetic corporate entitlement. A heavy knee pressed directly into the center of his spine to pin him securely to the ground. An officer grabbed his wrists and forcefully yanked them behind his back. The sharp plastic of thick industrial zip ties tightened violently around his wrists and completely immobilized his hands. 2 agents hauled him back up to his feet and dragged him aggressively toward a dark federal transport van idling nearby. They opened the heavy steel doors and threw him roughly into the stark metal interior. The massive doors slammed shut and locked him entirely in darkness. The arrogant scammer who had violently assaulted my daughter and mocked my intelligence was finally and permanently caged. His grand illusion of elite superiority was instantly shattered by the brutal reality of federal incarceration. He was no longer a tech genius or a master manipulator. He was simply another desperate criminal trapped inside the cold machinery of the federal justice system today. I sat in the quiet, private sitting area of my secure Atlanta hotel room holding a sleek digital tablet. The bright screen illuminated the dark room with a live broadcast from a major national news network. Hunter's official federal mugshot flashed prominently across the screen. The arrogant smirk was entirely gone from his face. He looked extremely pale, disheveled, and completely terrified in the harsh booking photograph. The serious news anchor detailed the massive multi-million-dollar corporate fraud and illegal money laundering scheme he had orchestrated. The reporter clearly explained that the FBI had successfully apprehended the fugitive attempting to cross the southern border with stolen cash. Kendra stood perfectly quietly right behind my comfortable chair and watched the entire live broadcast over my shoulder. She did not shed a single tear for her husband. She did not display any lingering affection or manufactured sympathy. Her bruised face remained entirely stoic and resolved. She looked at the screen and felt nothing but pure, unadulterated disgust for the violent coward she had mistakenly married. She quickly realized he was completely pathetic and entirely deserving of his harsh federal fate. My private secure cell phone suddenly vibrated heavily on the glass table. I answered the call and immediately recognized the voice of the lead FBI agent from the downtown field office. The agent informed me that Hunter was currently sitting chained to a metal table inside a bleak federal interrogation room. He told me that Hunter was already cracking under the immense pressure of a massive federal indictment. The agent stated that Hunter was frantically offering to turn completely state's evidence and fully testify against his own conspirators to save himself. Hunter was actively preparing to legally trade Ivonne to the federal government in a desperate bid to reduce his own imminent prison sentence today. The cold fluorescent lights of the federal interrogation room buzzed loudly above Hunter's bowed head. He sat chained to a heavy steel desk in a windowless facility in Texas. 2 veteran FBI agents sat across from him with a thick stack of printed financial ledgers. They did not need to aggressively press him for a confession today. Hunter completely folded the exact second he realized the sheer magnitude of the federal charges against him. He looked directly at the agents and immediately offered to completely expose the entire criminal hierarchy of his family. He frantically pointed the finger directly at my wife. Hunter explicitly claimed that Ivonne was the absolute mastermind behind the forged home equity line of credit. He spun a desperate narrative painting himself as a highly manipulated victim of a greedy mother-in-law. He told the federal agents that Ivonne was absolutely terrified of losing her elite country club lifestyle after I legally restricted her access to my corporate accounts. He stated that she aggressively forced him to execute the digital forgery to secretly extract $300,000 from my property equity. He claimed Ivonne threatened to completely ruin his marriage to Kendra if he refused to comply with her malicious financial demands. He provided exact dates and times when Ivonne allegedly ordered him to manipulate the banking software. He eagerly threw the woman who had protected him directly into the line of federal fire to save his own skin. He believed his immediate cooperation would magically erase his massive money laundering charges. The federal agents silently recorded every single word of his frantic confession. They allowed the terrified coward to talk himself into a completely inescapable corner. They simply gathered their legal documents and stepped out of the room to execute their next move immediately today. 2 hours later, a dark federal vehicle pulled into the driveway of my former Atlanta residence. The Georgia summer heat was absolutely oppressive. Ivonne sat completely alone inside the sweltering dark house. The terminated utilities left the massive brick structure feeling like a brick oven. She opened the heavy front door and found 2 federal agents standing on her porch. They did not ask for permission to enter the property. They walked directly into the stifling foyer and held up a digital audio recorder. They pressed play and forced Ivonne to listen to the exact audio clip of Hunter completely blaming her for the massive bank fraud. The sound of her son-in-law explicitly labeling her a criminal mastermind echoed through the hot, stagnant air. Ivonne went absolutely ballistic. The sheer shock of his ultimate betrayal instantly morphed into pure, unadulterated rage. She screamed at the federal agents that Hunter was a diagnosed clinical sociopath who had maliciously manipulated the entire family for years. She refused to take the fall for his massive corporate failures. She spun around and marched directly into my former home office. She violently yanked open the bottom drawer of the heavy oak desk. She grabbed a thick hidden folder containing physical printouts of Hunter's private corporate emails. She marched back to the foyer and shoved the documents directly into the agent's hands. She explicitly explained that the printed emails proved Hunter had personally coordinated the fake medical papers with Dr. Thorne. She showed them the digital receipts detailing how Hunter orchestrated the entire false dementia diagnosis to seize control of my Nevada trust. She eagerly sacrificed the man she had previously treated like a golden child to protect her own fragile freedom. She willingly handed them the ultimate undeniable proof of his deep criminal guilt today. The 2 federal agents silently reviewed the thick stack of printed emails standing in the sweltering foyer. They realized they possessed exactly what they needed to close the federal net permanently. Hunter and Ivonne had just provided the ultimate gift to the prosecution. Both criminal suspects had willingly and explicitly confessed to major elements of the massive federal crime in their desperate rush to destroy the other. Hunter admitted to the digital bank forgery to implicate Ivonne. Ivonne handed over undeniable proof of the medical extortion plot to destroy Hunter. Their mutual assured destruction was absolutely complete. The lead agent slowly closed the heavy folder and looked directly into Yvonne's bloodshot eyes. He did not offer her a polite warning or a chance to call her cheap defense attorney. He calmly informed her that the printed emails did not exonerate her from the massive banking fraud. They simply proved she was an active, willing participant in a highly coordinated federal racketeering conspiracy. He reached to his tactical belt and pulled out a heavy pair of steel handcuffs. He grabbed Yvonne's sweating wrists and forcefully locked the metal restraints behind her back. Yvonne began to hyperventilate and scream wildly as the cold reality of her permanent downfall finally hit her. The agents completely ignored her hysterical crying. They marched her forcefully out of the sweltering dark house and pushed her into the back seat of the federal vehicle. The neighborhood watched in absolute silence as the proud society matron was hauled away in federal custody. The agents drove her directly to the downtown federal detention center to be officially processed. She traded her elite country club status for a bright orange federal prison uniform today. Her life of immense luxury and endless manipulation was now officially over, forever, right now, today. I sat quietly in my secure Nevada office listening to the final operational update from Attorney Roth. He formally confirmed that Yvonne was currently sitting in federal lockup without any option for bail. He also informed me that the 30-day legal eviction notice I issued to my treacherous wife had officially expired today. I did not waste a single moment. I immediately authorized Roth to dispatch the county sheriff directly to the Atlanta house. 2 marked sheriff vehicles arrived at the empty property within the hour. Heavily armed deputies formally secured the entire perimeter and officially executed the corporate eviction order. They brought in a specialized private locksmith to completely drill out and replace every single deadbolt on the exterior doors. They wrapped heavy steel chains tightly around the wrought iron driveway gates and secured them with massive industrial padlocks. The physical symbol of my old compliant life was completely and permanently shut down. The massive brick house that Yvonne had weaponized to destroy my personal freedom now stood totally empty and legally impenetrable. I felt an immense wave of absolute closure wash over my chest. I had successfully dismantled the malicious criminal syndicate my family had become. My secure cell phone chimed sharply on the glass desk. I unlocked the screen and opened an encrypted email directly from the United States Department of Justice. The lead federal prosecutor had officially issued a binding legal subpoena demanding my physical presence. I was formally summoned to return to Atlanta and testify under federal oath as the absolute star witness in the upcoming criminal trial against my soon-to-be ex-wife and my corrupt son-in-law. The massive legal war was entering its final, devastating phase in open court. I smiled coldly and instructed Roth to prepare my flight itinerary back to Georgia immediately. Exactly 6 months after the massive federal indictments were officially unsealed, the sprawling criminal trial commenced inside the primary federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta. The grand mahogany doors slammed shut to seal the heavily guarded courtroom from the chaotic media circus swarming the exterior concrete steps. Hunter and Yvonne sat strictly isolated at 2 entirely separate defense tables. They completely refused to acknowledge each other's physical presence in the tense room. The toxic alliance that once fueled their massive extortion plot had entirely disintegrated into pure, unadulterated hatred. Yvonne wore a drab tan pantsuit that sharply contrasted with her former elite country club aesthetic. Her face was gaunt and completely drained of her trademark aristocratic arrogance. Hunter sat slouched in his wooden chair, wearing a poorly fitting borrowed suit. He nervously bounced his knee against the heavy wooden table while sweating profusely under the harsh fluorescent lights. The presiding federal judge loudly called the high-profile fraud case to order and instructed the prosecution to call their absolute primary witness. I stood up from the front row of the gallery and walked directly toward the elevated wooden witness stand. I wore a perfectly tailored dark charcoal suit paired with a crisp white shirt and a subdued navy tie. I moved with absolute undeniable authority and complete total composure. I raised my right hand and swore a binding federal oath to tell the absolute truth. I sat down in the heavy leather chair and looked directly at the 12 silent jurors seated in the adjacent box. I did not project the image of a frail, confused, elderly victim. I radiated the absolute focused power of a highly successful corporate executive who had systematically dismantled a massive criminal conspiracy. I was completely and absolutely ready to finish this massive legal war right now today. The lead federal prosecutor stepped up to the heavy wooden podium and immediately focused his intense questioning on the fraudulent $300,000 home equity line of credit. He formally asked me to detail my exact physical location and corporate actions during the specific week the massive digital loan was officially authorized. I did not offer any emotional anecdotes or vague personal recollections. I presented the jury with pure, irrefutable financial data and perfectly documented operational logs. I utilized a large high-definition monitor positioned directly in front of the jury box to display the exact unedited banking records. I pointed directly to the highly specific digital timestamps attached to the forged electronic signatures that executed the massive financial withdrawal. I then produced certified commercial flight manifests and perfectly tracked hotel receipts that completely verified my exact physical movements. I proved beyond a shadow of a legal doubt that I was physically residing inside a secure corporate office in Nevada when the loan documents were finalized in Georgia. I clearly explained that the digital IP addresses actively utilized to secure the massive banking transfer originated directly from Hunter's personal residential router. The prosecutor highlighted the undeniable fact that the stolen funds were immediately wired directly into a hidden offshore account entirely controlled by Hunter and actively monitored by Ivonne. The physical paper trail was absolutely airtight and mathematically flawless. I watched the 12 jurors carefully review the highlighted financial ledgers and rapidly take copious notes. They easily understood the sheer mathematical impossibility of my involvement in the fraudulent bank withdrawal. Hunter physically shrank down lower into his seat as his digital footprints were completely exposed to the entire courtroom. The irrefutable corporate data had systematically destroyed their core legal defense and completely trapped them in their financial lies today. The aggressive lead defense attorney slowly approached the witness stand, attempting to physically rattle my absolute composure. He dramatically raised his voice and aggressively questioned my underlying personal motives for maintaining total financial secrecy. He loudly demanded to know if I had intentionally and maliciously hidden my massive $12 million corporate fortune simply to cruelly deceive my own devoted family. He heavily attempted to paint me as a deeply manipulative and highly deceitful patriarch who actively trapped his innocent wife in a complex web of financial lies. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of emotional frustration. I leaned forward into the sensitive microphone and replied in a purely cold and brutally calculated tone. I firmly stated that I intentionally hid my massive corporate success to conduct a silent and necessary test of their absolute fundamental character. I looked directly at the captivated jury and clearly explained that vast wealth rapidly corrupts weak individuals who entirely lack genuine moral boundaries. I informed the silent courtroom that my family completely failed this crucial financial test without any external provocation. I told the jury that their true rotten character was not initially revealed during a massive banking fraud or a complex medical extortion plot. I stated that their absolute toxic greed was explicitly revealed during a simple backyard barbecue over a basic glass of iced tea. I detailed the profound disrespect and sheer naked arrogance they displayed when they firmly believed I was nothing more than a highly disposable and entirely useless old man. The defense attorney stood completely frozen in front of the heavy wooden podium. My absolute brutal honesty completely derailed his aggressive legal narrative and left him entirely without a valid counter-argument in open federal court today. The federal prosecutor reclaimed the central podium to completely deliver the absolute final legal death blow to the fractured defense. He formally entered a certified digital audio file into the permanent federal record. He connected a small encrypted device to the central courtroom speakers and pressed the play button. The crystal-clear audio recording of Hunter actively attempting to violently extort me echoed loudly throughout the silent chamber. The jury listened in absolutely stunned horror as Hunter explicitly detailed his highly malicious plan to completely destroy an innocent man's mind solely for corporate cash. They heard his arrogant voice explicitly threaten to lock me inside a severe psychiatric facility and forcefully pump my veins full of heavy sedatives. They listened as he clearly outlined how Ivonne had fully approved the fabricated medical diagnosis to permanently steal my entire Nevada estate. The sheer naked cruelty captured on the digital recording completely drained the remaining oxygen from the tense courtroom. Several jurors physically recoiled in their heavy leather seats and glared directly at the two terrified defendants with pure, unadulterated disgust. The undeniable digital evidence completely obliterated any lingering shadow of reasonable doubt. Hunter buried his sweating face entirely in his trembling hands while Ivonne stared blankly at the dark mahogany table in complete and utter total defeat. The deeply demoralized defense attorneys quietly approached the central bench and formally rested their entire case without ever calling a single witness to the stand. The overwhelming weight of the federal evidence made any further legal defense entirely impossible. The judge formally instructed the jury and sent them directly to the private deliberation room. Exactly 2 short hours later, the solemn jury foreman walked back into the silent courtroom and officially handed the sealed verdict envelope directly to the presiding judge. The presiding federal judge accepted the thick manila envelope from the solemn jury foreman with a gravely serious expression. He put on his reading glasses and sliced open the seal with a sharp silver letter opener. The entire courtroom held its collective breath as the heavy silence stretched into absolute agony. The judge unfolded the formal parchment and cleared his throat. He looked directly across the room at the 2 isolated defense tables. He began reading the official federal verdicts aloud with a booming and unyielding voice. He explicitly addressed the primary defendant first. Hunter was found entirely and unequivocally guilty on every single federal charge listed in the massive indictment. The judge systematically rattled off the devastating convictions. Hunter was officially guilty of massive wire fraud. He was guilty of malicious corporate extortion. He was guilty of severe digital forgery. He was guilty of high-level money laundering. The sheer weight of the absolute legal destruction instantly crushed the arrogant scammer. Hunter physically collapsed forward and dropped his heavy head directly onto the hard mahogany table in front of him. He let out a hollow and defeated groan as his entire fabricated universe permanently shattered into a million pieces. The judge did not pause to acknowledge the broken man. He immediately turned his stern gaze directly toward my treacherous wife. He formally announced that Ivonne was found unequivocally guilty of active conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud and blatant perjury. The sharp reality of becoming a convicted federal felon completely broke her aristocratic facade. Ivonne instantly began to sob uncontrollably. Her shoulders heaved violently as she buried her tear-stained face entirely into her trembling hands. The undeniable truth of her absolute downfall echoed incredibly loudly through the highly silent federal courtroom today. The federal judge did not delay the inevitable conclusion of this massive legal war. He explicitly waived the standard pre-sentencing investigation period and opted for an immediate and completely swift sentencing phase right there on the spot. He stared directly down at the defeated son-in-law who had violently assaulted my daughter and maliciously attempted to hijack my corporate estate. The judge spoke with pure, unadulterated judicial fury. He explicitly noted Hunter's absolute total lack of genuine remorse and his deeply embedded manipulative nature. He clearly stated that Hunter was a highly dangerous financial predator who completely lacked any fundamental moral compass or basic human decency. The judge formally sentenced Hunter to exactly 15 years inside a maximum security federal penitentiary. He deliberately structured the harsh sentence to entirely block any future possibility of early parole or good behavior reductions. Hunter was legally guaranteed to spend the next decade and a half locked inside a sterile concrete federal cage. 2 heavily armed United States Marshals immediately stepped forward and physically grabbed Hunter by his slumped shoulders. They forcefully yanked him up from the wooden chair and aggressively twisted his arms tightly behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs echoed extremely loudly throughout the incredibly tense courtroom. They roughly shoved the convicted felon forward and marched him directly toward the heavily secured side exit. Hunter kept his head bowed low in complete and absolute total humiliation. He dragged his feet across the polished floor and completely refused to meet the eyes of anyone in the gallery. He walked straight through the heavy wooden doors and entirely vanished into the dark bowels of the federal courthouse. He did not turn his head or attempt to look back even a single time today. The furious federal judge immediately shifted his unyielding judicial focus back toward my weeping wife. He looked down at the hysterical society matron with an expression of pure absolute disgust. He acknowledged her deeply subordinate role in the massive medical extortion plot but completely refused to grant her a full legal pardon. He formally sentenced Ivonne to exactly 5 years of highly strict and intensely monitored federal probation. He explicitly stated that her physical freedom came with a profoundly devastating financial cost. The judge officially ordered Ivonne to pay severe and immediate financial restitution to the federal court system and to my protected corporate trust. He slammed his heavy wooden gavel down and legally authorized the total immediate seizure of her remaining hidden personal assets. He systematically stripped away her secret bank accounts and liquidated her remaining jewelry collection entirely. He did not stop his aggressive punishment right there. He legally mandated that Ivonne must secure immediate full-time physical employment. He explicitly ordered the Federal Probation Office to automatically garnish exactly 70% of her weekly wages until the massive restitution debt was entirely cleared. Ivonne let out a sharp, terrified gasp as the absolute harsh reality of her new impoverished existence finally sank deeply into her mind. She realized she would spend the next 5 years physically laboring in a low-wage job just to barely survive. Her elite aristocratic identity was completely and utterly destroyed. Her luxurious country club life of expensive luncheons and endless entitlement was permanently over forever. She was officially reduced to a convicted federal felon shackled to a massive mountain of completely unpayable debt. The judge slammed his gavel one final time and formally adjourned the massive criminal trial completely right now today. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung open and the packed gallery began to filter out into the bright public corridor. I stood up from my front row seat and adjusted my tailored suit jacket with absolute calm precision. I walked confidently out into the wide marble hallway, completely surrounded by my silent security detail. I fully intended to walk directly to my waiting armored vehicle and leave this dark chapter entirely behind me. A sudden frantic commotion suddenly erupted directly behind my back. Ivonne aggressively broke away from her cheap public defender and physically sprinted across the polished marble floor. She threw herself violently forward and completely collapsed onto her bare knees directly in front of my expensive leather shoes. She desperately grabbed a tight fistful of my tailored pant leg with both of her trembling hands. She looked up at me with dark mascara streaming heavily down her gaunt, ruined face. She hysterically begged for my absolute forgiveness in front of the entire crowded federal hallway. She wildly pleaded for me to legally drop the divorce petition and physically take her back into my protected home. She sobbed that she absolutely could not survive the grueling reality of manual labor and severe grinding poverty. She promised to serve me perfectly and obey my every single command if I simply rescued her from her own total financial destruction. I looked down at the pathetic weeping creature clutching my ankle in absolute total desperation. I did not show a single ounce of mercy or personal sympathy. I stood completely still and reached my right hand smoothly into the inner breast pocket of my charcoal suit. I slowly pulled out a single pristine folded legal document today. I looked down at the sobbing woman kneeling on the cold marble floor of the federal courthouse. I calmly unfolded the single pristine document I had retrieved from my tailored suit jacket and held it directly in front of her wet, tear-stained face. It was the absolute final formalized divorce decree. I clearly explained that the presiding family court judge had officially signed the binding paperwork just this very morning. I informed Ivonne that her severe felony conviction for actively conspiring to defraud our marital estate carried massive and permanent financial consequences. The strict legal clauses completely nullified her legal entitlement to any portion of my corporate assets or personal wealth. I explicitly stated that she would receive absolutely nothing in the final settlement. There would be 0 monthly alimony payments to sustain her new impoverished reality. There would be no shared properties or hidden offshore accounts left for her to secretly drain. The massive brick house in Atlanta and the sprawling estate in Nevada were completely protected and entirely out of her reach forever. Ivonne stared blindly at the stark black ink on the heavy white paper. Her trembling hands slowly released their desperate grip on my tailored pant leg. She finally realized that her elaborate socialite fantasy had been entirely eradicated by her own malicious greed. I took a deliberate and firm step backward to physically separate myself from her pathetic public display. I smoothed out the fabric of my trousers with absolute calculated precision. I refused to let her toxic desperation cling to me for a single second longer. She was now completely legally and financially severed from my entire existence without any exceptions. The parasite that had quietly fed on my hard-earned success for decades was now permanently and irreversibly detached from my life today. I stood tall in the crowded marble hallway and looked down at her completely ruined form. I did not yell or raise my voice to match her hysterical sobbing today. I spoke with an absolute and chilling finality that completely sliced through the noisy corridor. I told her that she had possessed a genuine opportunity to live a peaceful and highly respected life. I clearly reminded her of the exact pivotal moment she permanently destroyed our long marriage. I explicitly stated that she made her ultimate choice the very day she foolishly ordered me to apologize to Hunter. I recounted how she maliciously demanded that I bow down to an arrogant boy who had deeply disrespected my entire life work. I explained that her blinding obsession with superficial country club appearances had entirely blinded her to the very real criminal danger sitting directly inside our own home. I informed her that she traded a fiercely loyal husband for a pathetic money launderer simply because he drove a flashy leased car. I told her she was now entirely free to navigate the brutal consequences of that highly superficial choice absolutely alone. Ivonne continued to weep violently against the cold marble floor, but I felt absolutely no lingering attachment to her suffering. She was merely a stranger bearing the heavy, crushing weight of her own massive federal felonies. I did not offer her a helping hand or a final word of shallow comfort today. I simply turned my back on her violently shaking figure right then and there. I walked with steady and unyielding purpose straight toward the massive double doors of the federal courthouse. The heavy glass doors automatically slid open and I stepped out into the blinding afternoon sun. I left my toxic past entirely behind me forever right now. I drove directly from the tense downtown federal courthouse to a quiet, unassuming diner located near the busy Atlanta International Airport. I walked inside the brightly lit restaurant and immediately spotted Kendra sitting entirely alone in a vinyl corner booth. She looked completely and fundamentally different from the incredibly arrogant young woman I had confronted just a few months ago. She wore highly simple and entirely unbranded clothing instead of her usual flashy designer labels. The massive diamond rings and the highly expensive luxury handbags were entirely gone from her physical possession. Her face was completely clear of heavy makeup and her posture reflected a newly discovered profound humility. I slid into the booth across from her and ordered a simple cup of black coffee from the passing waitress. Kendra did not offer any empty small talk or attempt to manufacture fake familial warmth today. She reached directly into her plain canvas tote bag and retrieved a crisp white rectangular document. She slid a certified bank check directly across the scratched laminate table toward my waiting hands. I looked down and clearly saw that the secure bank draft was made out for exactly $2,000. Kendra looked me directly in the eyes with a completely steady and entirely unwavering gaze. She explicitly stated that the certified check was the absolute first formal installment toward repaying the massive fortune Hunter had illegally stolen from my corporate accounts. She explained that she had secured a highly demanding corporate desk job and was actively working 50 hours every single week. She calmly declared her absolute intention to methodically repay every single dime her criminal husband had fraudulently extracted from my corporate estate today. Her voice completely lacked any trace of her former toxic entitlement right now in this exact diner booth today. I stared at the certified bank check resting perfectly still on the scratched diner table. I fully understood the immense physical and emotional labor required for her to save that specific amount of cash. I slowly extended my right hand and gently slid the rectangular document directly back across the table toward her. I spoke in a quiet and supportive paternal tone. I clearly instructed her to use the $2,000 to pay her monthly rent and buy necessary groceries. I told her that she needed the survival funds significantly more than my massive corporate trust did. Kendra immediately shook her head and forcefully pushed the check right back toward my side of the booth. She absolutely refused to accept any further unearned financial charity from me. She explicitly insisted on completely paying her own debts to fully earn her independent life back. She stated that accepting my money would simply restart the exact same toxic cycle of endless entitlement that had nearly destroyed her entire existence. I looked deeply into my daughter and her tired eyes and saw a newly forged, fierce pride burning brightly within them. She was finally taking absolute personal accountability for her own adult survival. I nodded in silent, profound respect and securely tucked the check directly into my wallet. The deeply destructive generational cycle of unearned luxury was finally permanently broken today. I stood up from the diner booth and walked directly out to my waiting armored vehicle. I instructed my private driver to head straight to the private airport tarmac immediately. I sat in the spacious leather back seat and calmly pulled out a thick stack of final legal contracts. I utilized my fountain pen to officially sign the final paperwork to sell the sprawling Atlanta house, completely erasing my physical footprint from Georgia. I sat across from the large mahogany desk in the quiet conference room of the downtown real estate office, finalizing the absolute final details of the Atlanta property sale. I did not sell my former home to another wealthy society matron or an arrogant corporate developer. I deliberately chose a young, highly motivated couple who worked grueling blue-collar jobs in construction and nursing. I sold the massive brick estate significantly below current market value to explicitly guarantee they could secure the traditional mortgage. The young husband shook my hand firmly, with rough, calloused fingers that reminded me entirely of my own early days building my plumbing empire. I watched them sign the closing documents with genuine, overwhelming gratitude and immense pride. I stood up and instructed the managing escrow agent to completely bypass my personal corporate accounts. I legally directed the agent to wire the entire multi-million-dollar sale proceeds directly into a newly established charitable foundation. The specialized philanthropic trust was explicitly designed to fully fund full-ride scholarships for local trade schools and underfunded plumbing apprenticeships. I deliberately converted the physical symbol of Yvonne's arrogant country club entitlement into a permanent structural lifeline for hardworking young men and women entirely identical to who I used to be. The massive brick house was no longer a toxic monument to shallow greed. It was officially a powerful engine for authentic blue-collar opportunity and honest generational wealth creation starting today. The severe financial dominoes I had methodically tipped over finally reached their ultimate absolute conclusion. Derek formally and publicly declared total corporate bankruptcy in federal court the following Tuesday morning. His highly leveraged luxury car dealership was entirely shut down and aggressively liquidated by his massive swarm of angry creditors. The pristine showroom was padlocked, and the remaining inventory of expensive sports cars was physically towed away to satisfy his overwhelming commercial debts. He lost his sprawling luxury apartment and his completely fabricated image of elite corporate success entirely overnight. My secure cell phone illuminated with an incoming call from his personal number late that afternoon. I knew exactly what he desperately wanted before the phone even completed its first electronic ring. He was calling to frantically beg for one final massive personal loan to save himself from total grinding poverty. I did not accept the call or offer him a single second of paternal comfort. I stared at the glowing digital screen and pressed the red button to send his desperate plea directly to my automated voicemail. I immediately opened my contact settings and permanently deleted his physical number from my device. I completely blocked any future digital or physical communication from my deeply arrogant son. The incredibly toxic branches of my family tree were now officially and entirely pruned away without a single ounce of lingering hesitation or emotional regret today. My private secure phone chimed with a scheduled incoming call later that same evening. I accepted the connection and heard Kendra's tired but incredibly steady voice on the other end of the digital line. She was calling from her new, highly modest one-bedroom apartment located entirely across the country in a completely different city. She informed me that she had successfully secured a grueling position working as a full-time shift manager at a busy local retail store. She was physically exhausted from standing on her feet for 10 straight hours, dealing directly with demanding customers and managing tight inventory schedules. She did not complain or attempt to solicit my financial sympathy. She spoke with a completely new and entirely genuine sense of quiet, internal happiness. She explicitly told me that she finally truly understood the profound internal peace that only comes from a single dollar earned through pure, honest physical sweat. She explained that she no longer felt the constant suffocating anxiety of trying to maintain a massive artificial image of luxury and wealth. She was finally living entirely within her own actual financial means and building a completely authentic life from the absolute ground up. The sheer arrogance and toxic entitlement that had nearly destroyed her entire existence was entirely burned away by the harsh reality of honest labor. I listened to my daughter speak and finally recognized the incredibly strong and highly capable woman I always knew she could entirely become today. I leaned back in my comfortable leather chair and offered Kendra a very specific and highly conditional form of paternal support. I explicitly stated that I would not buy her a new luxury car or quietly pay her monthly apartment rent. I set absolutely firm financial boundaries to protect her newly discovered independence. I formally offered to fully finance her weekly professional therapy sessions and entirely cover the tuition for her evening business management classes at the local community college. I made it absolutely clear that these specific funds were strictly for her intellectual and emotional growth and completely unavailable for any frivolous personal spending. Kendra did not argue or attempt to aggressively negotiate for a larger cash allowance. She accepted the strict educational offer with profound and deeply genuine emotional gratitude. She thanked me for finally forcing her to grow up and take absolute accountability for her own survival. She politely hung up the phone to quickly prepare for her upcoming grueling evening shift at the retail store. The deeply destructive generational cycle of unearned luxury and massive toxic entitlement was finally and permanently shattered forever. I stood up and gathered my sleek leather briefcase. I walked out of the quiet hotel room and headed directly toward the private terminal at the busy Atlanta airport. I boarded my private jet and instructed the pilot to fly me entirely back to my secure home in Nevada. Several hours later, I sat behind the wheel of my old trusted pickup truck. I drove steadily up a steep, winding mountain road heading directly toward my secluded private cabin, surrounded completely by towering, silent pines today. Neil navigated the heavy pickup truck up the final steep incline of the rugged Nevada mountain pass. The dense canopy of towering evergreen pines slowly parted to reveal his massive, secluded sanctuary. He killed the rumbling engine and stepped out into the biting evening air. The atmosphere at this high elevation was incredibly crisp and perfectly clean. It immediately filled his lungs with a sharp, refreshing purity that stood in absolute contrast to the stagnant, suffocating humidity of Atlanta. His heavy leather boots crunched loudly against the gravel driveway as he walked deliberately toward the massive structure. The sprawling cabin was a magnificent fortress constructed entirely of thick, rough-hewn timber and giant slabs of natural gray stone. It sat perfectly integrated into the harsh mountain landscape like a permanent natural fixture. The property was completely isolated from the chaotic outside world. Heavy steel gates and an advanced invisible security perimeter protected the vast acreage from any unwanted physical intrusion. There were no nosy neighbors hovering nearby to constantly judge his simple lifestyle choices. There were no arrogant society matrons whispering behind his back or demanding his attendance at superficial country club galas. The endless, exhausting parade of fake social obligations was permanently eradicated. Neil stood completely alone in the sprawling driveway and deeply inhaled the sharp scent of pine needles. He looked around the empty, quiet woods and felt a profound physical weight permanently detach from his shoulders. This isolated sanctuary represented the absolute physical manifestation of his hard-won personal freedom. He had meticulously designed and legally secured this impenetrable mountain fortress to serve as his ultimate safe harbor. He walked slowly up the heavy wooden steps toward the massive solid oak front door, feeling an overwhelming wave of deep, absolute tranquility completely wash over his entire body right now. Neil pushed open the heavy front door and stepped directly into the dark, expansive living room. The interior of the massive cabin immediately greeted him with the rich, deeply comforting scent of aged cedar wood and dusty old books. The thick wooden floorboards creaked softly under his steady footsteps as he walked purposefully toward his secure private study. He did not bother switching on the overhead lighting. He navigated the familiar dark space entirely by memory and approached his heavy steel desk. He opened his encrypted laptop and immediately initiated a highly secure connection to his private financial terminal. The glowing digital screen instantly illuminated his stern face in the darkened room. He methodically reviewed his massive offshore corporate accounts and the deeply protected Nevada Trust one absolute final time. His vast financial empire remained completely untouched and structurally flawless. The $12 million fortune he had built through decades of grueling manual labor was actively growing completely silently in the protected digital background. The complex legal trust he had meticulously established was absolutely ironclad and entirely impervious to any future external attacks. Ivonne was locked into a grinding 5-year sentence of severe manual labor and total financial destitution. Hunter was permanently caged inside a brutal, maximum security federal penitentiary for the next decade and a half. Kendra was completely separated from her toxic entitlement and actively working 50 hours a week to slowly earn her own independent life. The massive internal threat that had maliciously attempted to completely drain his corporate lifeblood was entirely eradicated. Neil stared at the glowing numbers verifying his total absolute security. He slowly reached out and firmly closed the heavy laptop. The screen went completely black. The massive, exhausting war was officially and permanently over right now at this exact moment, perfectly and forever today. Neil walked away from the darkened study and headed directly into the spacious rustic kitchen. He opened the heavy stainless steel refrigerator and pulled out a tall glass pitcher filled to the absolute brim with freshly brewed cold tea. He reached into the dark wooden cabinets and retrieved a heavy crystal tumbler. He dropped exactly 3 large clear ice cubes into the bottom of the heavy glass. He slowly poured the cold amber liquid over the clinking ice and watched the condensation immediately begin to form on the exterior of the crystal. He gripped the cold glass firmly in his right hand. It was the exact same simple beverage he was holding during that fateful summer barbecue several months ago. It was the precise drink he had been clutching when Hunter and Ivonne first maliciously conspired to completely steal his hard-earned wealth and permanently destroy his peaceful retirement. But standing completely alone in his secure mountain fortress, this specific glass of iced tea tasted fundamentally and entirely different. The bitter, toxic flavor of familial betrayal and silent humiliation was completely gone. The cold liquid currently sliding down his throat tasted entirely like absolute, unadulterated victory. It carried the incredibly sweet flavor of permanent vindication and total personal liberation. He savored the freezing drink for a long, quiet moment before turning around. He carried the heavy crystal tumbler directly toward the rear of the massive cabin. He pushed open the heavy glass sliding doors and stepped confidently outside. He walked completely out onto the expansive wooden rear porch that extended dramatically over the steep, rocky cliffside. He gripped the thick wooden railing and looked directly out over the incredibly vast, sweeping valley stretching endlessly below his incredibly massive, isolated mountain property right now with absolute, complete, deep personal satisfaction here today. The bright setting sun began to slowly drop directly behind the rugged, jagged mountain peaks located on the distant western horizon. It cast a brilliant, glowing golden light entirely over the massive ancient pine trees completely surrounding the secure cabin. The sky exploded into incredibly vibrant shades of deep orange and burning crimson. Neil watched the stunning natural light show entirely uninterrupted by the toxic demands of his former chaotic life. There was absolutely no one frantically calling his secure phone demanding unearned cash or free luxury vehicles. There was entirely no one loudly questioning his fundamental human worth or constantly demanding his unending subservient obedience. He was completely untethered from the parasitic leeches who had previously attempted to entirely drain his massive personal success. He had successfully built a sprawling $12 million corporate fortune entirely with his own 2 calloused hands over 4 grueling decades. He had strategically protected that immense wealth completely with his own brilliant razor-sharp mind. He had systematically dismantled his arrogant, malicious abusers completely legally without ever having to violently raise his fists. The absolute total silence radiating across the isolated mountain property was incredibly deep and profoundly peaceful. It was not a lonely or heavily depressing isolation. It was a fiercely independent and beautifully calm absolute solitude. He slowly raised the heavy crystal tumbler to his lips and took one final, deeply satisfying, long sip of his freezing iced tea. He completely savored the cold, sharp flavor as the cool evening mountain breeze blew gently across his weathered face. His hard-won, peaceful retirement was finally completely secure and entirely impenetrable from all external threats. His absolute life and his incredibly massive personal legacy finally and absolutely completely belonged entirely to him forever, starting right now at this exact peaceful moment here forever today. If you enjoyed this story and found value in these lessons, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more powerful narratives. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to set strict financial boundaries with toxic family members? Let us know.